Chapter 1717. At this moment, the inexplicable fluctuations that were transmitted to their main bodies through the inexplicable connection between Emperor Ming and the others had already crashed into the life force of their main bodies. At this moment, the boundless, innate, undying essence contained in the innate, inextinguishable spirit light frantically rushed into the life source through this fluctuation, fusing with it, and rapidly changing their life source. At this moment, Emperor Ming and the others felt a deep sense of despair welling up from the bottom of their hearts. Amidst this despair, they used all their might to withdraw their power and pour it into the life force. They wanted to stop the innate, indestructible essence contained within the fluctuations from eroding their life force. During this process, the seed of chaos around which the 20 supreme emperors revolved gradually began to tremble. The chaotic state within the range of the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light also began to dissipate bit by bit. You actually attack from the inside. Do you think you can foil our operation just like that? At this moment, Emperor Ju's voice sounded from among the 20 supreme emperors. At this moment, all sorts of indescribable distortions appeared between them. As these distortions occurred, the bodies of Emperor Ming and the others gradually began to change. All sorts of inexplicable lights and shadows began to circulate endlessly on their bodies. Then, poof, 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 poof. After a few soft sounds, the bodies of Emperor Ming and the others suddenly solidified. Then, their bodies suddenly collapsed, producing an earth-shattering explosion that directly shattered the surrounding space-time into countless tiny fragments that formed smoke that began to surge in all directions. Drive them away? At this moment, Luo Fan already understood what they had done. It was obvious that after knowing that Emperor Ming and the others would become a threat to them, they had brazenly cut off the connection between Emperor Ming and the others and directly expelled them from the formation. Thus, no matter what happened to them, it would be impossible for them to affect the operation of the entire formation. As these changes occurred, the seed of chaos around which they revolved began to tremble violently, and countless faint cracks appeared on its surface. At the same time, the chaotic state within the range of the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light suddenly erupted. Countless worlds were born on the surface of the chaotic state. They began to distort the space-time within the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light into countless worlds. However, this change did not last long. Soon, an indescribable power swept through the chaotic state. It swept across the space-time. In an instant, the countless space-time and worlds were crushed, turning them back into a primal state. The primal state's power was restored, and it continued to attack the innate, inextinguishable spirit light. It continued to bring great impact to the innate, inextinguishable spirit light. Great pressure, however, compared to before. But now, the quality of this chaotic state seemed to have decreased. Faintly, there were signs of instability. It was as if it could collapse at any moment and be assimilated by the world, unable to maintain its state of chaos. This was obviously the change from before. It had already caused great damage to the formation, making it difficult for the formation to maintain its previous stability. Even the primal chaos state had such changes. At this moment, the primal chaos seed's changes weren't small either. At this moment, the primal chaos seed began to show faint cracks. Those cracks were fine and dense, directly enveloping the primal chaos seed. During this process, there seemed to be countless cracks appearing on the primal chaos seed, but they also seemed to heal in the next instant. It was an endless cycle of cracks and healing. However, the overall trend was that it was healing and stabilizing. Judging from the looks of it, the Emperor Ju and the others were using all sorts of methods to stabilize the primal chaos seed. Tried to use all sorts of methods to eliminate the impact of losing the Emperor Ming and the other 7 supreme emperors. At this moment, the countless fragments of the Emperor Ming and the others that exploded from before gradually healed. It didn't take long for 8 silhouettes to condense in space. They were the figures of the Emperor Ming and the others. As supreme emperors, immortality was just a concept. Under this situation, the explosion of their bodies wouldn't cause any great harm to them, so it naturally wouldn't take their lives. Earlier, when they were forcefully slashed out by the Emperor Ming and the others, although the terrifying impact had completely shattered their bodies, they were still alive. They were still enduring the impact of the fluctuations from their clones and the assimilation of the innate indestructible essence. At this moment, the Emperor Ming and the others all had fear on their faces. Although they had already been freed and could use their own strength, the fluctuations that had seeped into their life source were still endlessly being transmitted over. No matter what methods they used or what power they used to influence and stop it, they could only slow it down and couldn't completely stop it. After all, the fluctuations and the innate indestructible essence were transmitted over from their clones. As their clones that had been refined by the innate indestructible spiritual light, their understanding of the innate indestructible essence and their own bodies had reached an extremely profound level. Under this influence, the potential of the innate indestructible essence was perfectly unleashed, completely targeting the weaknesses of their own bodies. This was a natural instinct. With such an existence controlling the attack, how could the Emperor Ming and the others possibly stop it? In the end, the Emperor Ming and the others finally lost all hope and shouted, "I'd rather die than refine me." At this moment, a terrifying impact erupted from the depths of their life source. The impact was so strong that it was almost enough to destroy the heavens and earth. Just the prelude of the explosion alone had completely shattered the surrounding space-time, causing the space-time around them to turn into smoke that circled around their bodies. At this moment, the Emperor Ming shouted, "No, you'll break the formation if you do this. If that happens, we won't be able to do anything to the Emperor Luo. Are you all willing to watch the Emperor Luo escape without being affected at all?" These words instantly stunned the Emperor Ming and the others. They would rather die when they were about to be refined. This was their own will, their determination to rather die than live in dishonor. However, this didn't mean that they were willing to watch Luo Fan reap the benefits. To them, the one who forced them to choose death was Luo Fan. In this way, even if they had to die, they would never allow Luo Fan to reap the benefits. Even if they had to die, they would definitely make him pay the price. Under such circumstances, they suddenly realized that it was difficult for them to make up their minds to detonate their life source. It was difficult for them to self-detonate as decisively as before. The result of this was that the innate immortal essence that was constantly surging into their life source finally seized the best opportunity to enter the depths of their life source. It brazenly usurped the authority to control the depths of their life source. Even if they wanted to continue to self-detonate, there was no other way, no. At this moment, the Emperor Ming and the others only had time to let out a cry of agony before they fell into silence. The aura on their bodies gradually began to surge. It shrank rapidly. Not long after, all the aura had been completely withdrawn, inside and outside of their bodies. There was nothing special about them anymore. At this moment, 8 figures gradually floated in front of the huge formation. They floated outside the seed of chaos. Not long after, they slowly opened their eyes. Their eyes flickered with an indescribable light. It was a kind of eternal indestructibility, an indestructible light. In this light, one could see that their minds had become open-minded. There was no longer any hatred from before. Why do we resist just now? This is such a wonderful feeling. Emperor Ming murmured. Yes, this is the goal we should pursue. This is the state we should achieve in the end. If we had known this would happen, we would have given ourselves up earlier. Another emperor said. Immediately after, another emperor turned to Zhu Huang and the others and said, "Fellow Taoists, why do you still resist? We have already achieved eternal indestructibility and indestructibility. Isn't this the goal that all of you have been pursuing in your lifetime? As long as fellow Taoists hand over what you have and pay a small price, you will be able to achieve this goal. You will no longer need to go through the unknown path, nor will you need to spend hundreds of millions of years cultivating." Isn't that good? Hearing their words, Zhu Huang and the others felt chills down their spines. Although they knew that there would be changes after being refined by the innate indestructible spiritual light, they didn't expect the changes to be this strange. Just now, they would rather self-destruct than be refined. In the blink of an eye, they were already persuading others to be refined. Moreover, it seemed like they didn't lose their memories at all. Apart from the change in their thoughts, everything else seemed to be the same as before. Even the Supreme Emperors found it hard to accept such a situation. How pitiful. If I had known this would happen, I wouldn't have stopped you guys from self-destructing. Zhu Huang sighed. Fortunately, you stopped us. Otherwise, we would have missed such a good opportunity. That would be such a pity. At this moment, Emperor Ming thanked Zhu Huang and the others. Hearing this, Zhu Huang and the others had nothing else to say. For existences whose minds have been distorted to such an extent, anything else they said would just be nonsense. At most, it would only make them feel angry and depressed. At this moment, Luo Fan had an indescribable expression on his face. Countless thoughts kept appearing in his mind. At this moment, although the bodies of Emperor Ming and the others were filled with the innate indestructible spiritual light and were considered to be refined by the innate indestructible spiritual light, he still couldn't control their bodies to deal with Zhu Huang and the others. There was no other reason. It was because they were refined by the innate indestructible spiritual light. In other words, the innate indestructible spiritual light that filled their bodies couldn't leave the innate indestructible spiritual light. Although the innate indestructible spiritual light was transmitted to their bodies through the connection between their clones and bodies, it couldn't last long. They needed Luo Fan to maintain it at all times. Only then could he ensure that they stayed there and that the innate indestructible spiritual light couldn't absorb them all. Under such circumstances, it was already extremely difficult for Emperor Ming and the others to stay outside and talk. If they wanted to attack Zhu Huang and the others, it would be a fool's dream. Looks like there's no shortcut after all. Sighing in his heart, Luo Fan activated the innate indestructible spiritual light. In an instant, Emperor Ming felt that the innate indestructible spiritual light was about to leave his body. An indescribable fear couldn't help but rise from the bottom of his heart. Under this fear, they didn't dare to say anything. They didn't dare to say anything else. Thinking about Zhu Huang and the others, they once again expressed their gratitude and left. They took a step forward and their figures penetrated through time and space. They crashed into the innate indestructible spiritual light and directly arrived at where their clones were. After being refined by the innate indestructible spiritual light, the connection between the clones and the main body naturally returned to the initial state. In other words, the absolute connection between the clones and the main body was restored, the state where they shared consciousness. Under such circumstances, the main body came to the front of the clone, and the two naturally began to fuse. Not long after, the two completely fused into one. The two directly merged into one. The original two turned into one. The original 16 Supreme Emperors turned back into 6 Supreme Emperors. The difference between the clones and the main body was still quite huge. Even the Supreme Emperors were the same. Previously, when they were clones, Emperor Ming and the others were insignificant to Luo Fan. He even felt that he didn't even need the innate indestructible spiritual light to kill them easily. However, when they turned from clones to their main body, the situation was different. It felt like each of them was countless times stronger. Although the difference in their overall strength was not too big, only a few times difference, it gave Luo Fan the feeling that it would take a lot of effort to completely seal them. Instead of being able to destroy them with a single slap, it gave him the feeling that it would take a lot of effort. The reason for this change was very simple. It was because there was a huge difference between the existence of the clones and the main body. One had to know that clones were just clones. Most of them were formed by power. On the other hand, the main body started from zero and cultivated continuously. The stronger one was the stronger the source of the main body and the greater the difference between the main body and the clone. Although the main body wasn't that much stronger than the clone in terms of overall strength, the huge difference in the source meant that the main body's ability to withstand the negative effects was far stronger than the clones. Sensing the changes brought about by Emperor Ming and the others who had turned into their main bodies, Luo Fan smiled faintly. With a slight thought, orders were transmitted to the ears of Emperor Ming and the others. Under these orders, Emperor Ming and the others took action. At this moment, endless waves began to emit from their bodies. The ripples swept across the entire world cluster and filled the boundless void between the worlds. During this process, every world within the innate, inextinguishable spirit light began to emit a faint light. Endless power began to quickly integrate into the waves, gradually causing the world cluster within the innate, inextinguishable spirit light to change. The power that was transmitted from the outside and acted on these worlds, causing them to shake continuously. During this process, the power that kept shaking was received by the waves filled with endless power. The result was that the tremors would no longer affect these worlds, causing them to stop trembling and shaking. However, on the other hand, there were countless cracks appearing and closing on the bodies of Emperor Ming and the others. These cracks were extremely numerous, amounting to hundreds of millions of them. They spread all over their bodies, and it felt like the healing power between the various parts of their bodies was constantly collapsing and being destroyed, only to be revealed again and again. If they were clones, this change would be enough to completely destroy them. At the very least, they would need to be reborn through the power of the innate, inextinguishable spirit light. However, at this moment, in this position, it was the bodies of Emperor Ming and the others who were bearing this impact. So the situation was clearly different. At this moment, the faces of Emperor Ming and the others who were bearing this impact only showed signs of pain. However, there was only pain on their faces. The essence of their existence wasn't damaged at all. More and more power surged out of their bodies, healing the cracks and allowing their bodies to maintain their perfect state. They continued to receive the various ripples from the innate, indestructible spirit light, allowing the countless worlds within the innate, indestructible spirit light to expand. During this process, the countless worlds within the innate, inextinguishable spirit light were restored to their original state. From the outside, this change looked like the innate, inextinguishable spirit light had turned into a sphere. At this moment, it became stable. Calm down. No matter how the primal chaos wrapped around it attacked, its body did not waver. It did not change even the slightest bit because of that attack. Facing this change, the hearts of Zhu Huang and the others jolted. Originally, although they didn't intend to cause much damage to the innate, inextinguishable spirit light, they still held a slight hope that they could remove Luo Fan's imprint within it. They wanted to make Luo Fan lose the innate, inextinguishable spirit light. Thus, they wouldn't be able to stop the chaotic state from attacking his body. But now it seemed like even this thought had failed. It seemed like they had all failed at this moment. An incredulous voice came from the formation around the seed of chaos. An incredulous voice sounded from the formation around the seed of chaos. Obviously, a certain supreme emperor couldn't believe what he was seeing in front of him. Hence, he exclaimed in shock, "Nothing is impossible. How can the essence of supreme emperor be broken so easily? After they are refined by the innate, inextinguishable spirit light, they can constantly be replenished by the innate, inextinguishable spirit light. Naturally, they are stronger. What's so strange about withstanding this impact?" Zhu Huang said coldly. In his voice, there was an endless pressure that was being suppressed. This pressure was so heavy that the hearts of all the emperors who heard this became heavy. Then what should we do now? It seems like our almost plan has failed. Another supreme sovereign said. Failed? Who said we failed? Zhu Huang suddenly shouted at this moment. Oh, we haven't failed yet? I also want to hear why we haven't failed yet. At this moment, Luo Fan interrupted and said calmly. As he spoke, a faintly discernible figure appeared outside the formation where Zhu Huang and the others were. The position where Zhu Huang and the others were at was extremely strange. Before this, although Luo Fan could see them, there were too many changes and too many obstacles, so he couldn't reach this place at all. It was also because of this that Zhu Huang and the others didn't care about Luo Fan discovering their location. However, the situation now was different. Now, because Ming Huang and the others left this position and directly entered the innate, inextinguishable spirit light, this allowed Luo Fan to see the entire process clearly. It allowed him to directly see all the changes and all the obstacles clearly. If he wanted to come here, it was naturally just a matter of a thought. Seeing that Luo Fan's figure entered here, Zhu Huang and the others' hearts became even heavier. As long as we have this seed of chaos, you won't be able to hurt us at all, even with the Supreme Emperors. As long as we don't die, of course, it won't be considered a failure. Although Zhu Huang's heart was heavy, he still said, "Seed of chaos." Luo Fan frowned at this moment and quietly looked at the gray existence that everyone was surrounding. Countless thoughts flashed through his mind. What Zhu Huang said was not a lie. That seed of chaos was indeed not a small problem for Luo Fan. At this moment, Zhu Huang and the others constructed some kind of mysterious formation, causing them to form an extremely mysterious connection with the seed of chaos. This connection caused them to unknowingly exist in the same form as the seed of chaos. Chapter 17-18. Then let's take a look. Luo Fan said faintly. Although he couldn't think of a way to get rid of them, he had the upper hand at this moment after all. At this moment, the plan that the other party had put in so much effort and paid such a huge price had failed after all. In this situation, the one who was anxious would obviously not be Luo Fan, but Zhu Huang and the rest. Therefore, Luo Fan only quietly hovered beside the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, and quietly watched the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light steadily hovering there in the shape of a sphere, emitting an eternal and indestructible light. His projection was also hovering not far away from Zhu Huang and the others, looking at them with a probing gaze. He seemed to be looking for the flaws in their formation, looking for the various mysteries that the formation displayed in the process of its circulation. During this process, Zhu Huang and the rest had poured all their attention into the seed of chaos. They carefully controlled every change in the seed of chaos, allowing the power of the seed of chaos to constantly increase, guiding the chaotic state that was enveloped by the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light to attack the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, causing the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light to bear more and more pressure during this process. It was a pity that the chaotic state was not something that could be controlled by those below the true saint realm. Even though they had already exhausted all their efforts and poured all their attention into it, they still couldn't make much change to the chaotic state at this moment. The chaotic state was still the same as before, and there wasn't much change. In this way, the impact of the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light naturally couldn't break through the bodies of the light emperors and the rest. The impact on the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light could only remain the same as before, and there wasn't even any effect on it. At this moment, a sigh entered Luo Fan's ears. "Fellow Taoist, why do you have to be so ruthless? Now that they have learned their lesson, why don't you let them go?" It was a voice that Luo Fan was extremely familiar with. The voice of a world emperor. Luo Fan frowned. Why were there world emperors appearing everywhere? Previously, when he was attacked by those level 3 emperors, the world emperor appeared. After that, when the underworld was born, the world emperor also appeared. Now, he had to bear the brunt of the chaotic attack. He appeared again, which made him wonder if the world emperor was the police of this world. "Why do you say that, fellow Taoist? How am I being ruthless? I'm the one being attacked." "She's the victim," Luo Fan said lightly. He turned his head and looked towards the source of the sound. The World Emperor's figure appeared in his eyes. At this moment, the World Emperor was still in his cave abode, still in the gray, almost chaotic state of existence formed by the innate, inextinguishable spirit light. At this moment, his eyes also reflected everything that was happening at Luo Fan's location at this moment. It was just like how his image was being reflected in Luo Fan's eyes. "Fellow Taoist, Why do you have to lie? Look at the current state. Anyone with eyes can see it. Do you think that I can't see it? The World Emperor sighed. He said. Hearing this, Luo Fan said faintly, since fellow Taoists can see it, you should know my attitude. You should already know my attitude. Why do you have to open your mouth now? The World Emperor sighed. Although what they did was a little excessive, they couldn't hurt you. However, I wasn't able to harm fellow Taoists after all. On the contrary, I allowed fellow Taoists to obtain quite a bit of benefits, allowing fellow Taoists to overcome this crisis. No matter how you look at it, it can be said that the merits and demerits offset each other. Why can't fellow Taoists forgive people when possible? Merits and demerits offset each other? I didn't expect fellow Taoists to have such a calculation. Luo Fan only smiled. Merits and demerits offset each other? How could this be considered merits and demerits offset each other? It was a fact that the other party wanted to kill him. The other party directly guided the terrifying existence in the chaotic state to annihilate him. This was without a doubt. In such a situation, he was able to benefit from it. He was able to use this crisis to get through it, allowing his avatar to successfully break through. This was his own ability. What did it have to do with them? Could it be that someone attempted to kill someone and crippled another person? But because of this, that person couldn't ride a bike and was killed by a truck. Could this also be considered meritorious to the person who attempted to kill him? If that was the case, then was there still a need to sentence the murderer? Didn't that mean that by killing someone, someone else could benefit from it? Could this also be considered meritorious to the world? This obviously couldn't be calculated in this way. At this time, the World Emperor was a little embarrassed. Obviously, he didn't agree with what he said. However, at this time, this was the only reason he could say, so he could only say it. Fellow Taoist, why do you care so much? To you, they are just ants. Arguing with them will lower your status for no reason. Letting them go will show that fellow Taoist is magnanimous. Why not? The World Emperor sighed and said, Fellow Taoist, you don't have to say anymore. You can talk to me after you've convinced yourself, Luo Fan said calmly. Hearing this, the World Emperor looked even more embarrassed. He really couldn't convince himself. However, even if he couldn't convince himself, he couldn't just watch as Luo Fan killed Emperor Ju and the other emperors. One should know that although this world was vast, there were countless experts, and it was currently walking on the correct path of continuous evolution. However, emperors were extremely precious existences to the heavens and earth. Although there was no complete statistics, there were only about 1,000 emperors in this world since ancient times. Judging from this number, the 20 or so emperors didn't seem to be much. However, don't forget these 1,000 or so emperors. Most of them were just ordinary supreme emperors. Among them, the number of level 2 emperors who could control divine light was only a small portion of them. Relatively speaking, 20 or so emperors were already a huge proportion of the total. Under such circumstances, if Emperor Ju and the others were killed by Luo Fan, then the strength of this world would obviously be greatly reduced. At that time, this world would definitely be in chaos. Perhaps even the good situation of this world would be destroyed, and even the rapid development of this world would be cut off. It was precisely because of this that the World Emperor had no choice but to intervene at this time. I don't believe that you don't know my intentions. The World Emperor sighed and said, This world isn't a reason for me to let them go. Luo Fan said calmly. He might not have known what the World Emperor meant before, but how outstanding was his thinking ability. As long as he thought about it a little, he would naturally be able to figure everything out. Naturally, he already understood the World Emperor's thoughts and intentions. However, so what? To Luo Fan, this world was just a place for cultivation. To him, if this world developed well, it was just a slightly better environment for cultivation. If this world didn't develop well, it would affect him. It wasn't great. Under such circumstances, how could he be willing to let go of the supreme emperors who wanted to kill him for the sake of this world's development? If that was the case, wouldn't anyone be able to use the reason that he had contributed to this world to escape his punishment after dealing with him? It was obviously impossible for that to be the case. At this moment, the World Emperor's brows were already furrowed. To the World Emperor who had developed for the longest time in this world, the significance of this world to him was obviously different from the other Supreme Emperors. This place, it was equivalent to his home, his roots. As long as it was beneficial to this world, he was even willing to sacrifice everything except himself. Even if he had to suffer some grievances, he wouldn't hesitate. It was also because of this that when he had a conflict with Luo Fan, he saw that Luo Fan's actions would bring great benefits to this world, because he knew that the development of the civilized country would also bring great development to this world. That was why he let Luo Fan go so easily, and even gave a lot of convenience to the development of this civilized country. Otherwise, with Luo Fan's strength back then, how could he gain the upper hand in front of him? How could the development of this civilized country go so smoothly? Could it be that the other Supreme Emperors couldn't see how much benefit the development of this civilized country would bring to Luo Fan? Were they really so noble and unquestionable integrity that they weren't tempted by the benefits of this civilized country? Without the existence of the World Emperor, a third-level emperor who had lived for the longest time among all the Supreme Emperors, with just Gui Shou and the others, the master of this civilized country would have changed long ago. With the mentality of the World Emperor, he obviously couldn't stand Luo Fan's attitude. At this moment, he frowned and said faintly, "Now, this world's great tribulation is coming. All strength is important. I hope you can put aside your personal grievances and spare them. At least, let them preserve enough strength to fight against the great tribulation." Great tribulation of heaven and earth. Luo Fan frowned. This world was a perfect world. He had already sensed this the moment he stepped into this world. However, he had never sensed when the great tribulation of the heavens and earth would arrive. Due to the special structure of this world, he even thought that there wouldn't be a great tribulation of heaven and earth. Under such circumstances, he couldn't help but be a little stunned when he heard the World Emperor mention the great tribulation of heaven and earth. "That's right. Don't you feel it?" The World Emperor frowned and said. Hearing this, Luo Fan's heart skipped a beat. With a slight sense, he felt an inexplicable pressure from the surrounding world acting on his heart. This kind of pressure was like the arrival of a storm, as if some kind of indescribable and terrifying change was brewing, as if all kinds of terrible disasters were about to be born in this world. This kind of feeling was extremely obscure and vague. If he didn't carefully sense it, he would definitely ignore it. There really is. The great tribulation of heaven and earth is about to come. Luo Fan instantly understood and knew the source of the pressure. Seeing the change in Luo Fan's expression, the World Emperor already knew that Luo Fan had clearly sensed what he wanted him to sense. He immediately said, "This great tribulation of heaven and earth is the first time this world has seen it. We don't know how strong it will be. We have no experience to use for reference. I hope that you can look at the bigger picture. How can it be the first time? Hasn't this world already existed for countless years?" Luo Fan frowned and said. He had grasped the strangeness in the World Emperor's words. The World Emperor looked at Luo Fan with an inexplicable gaze and said, "That's right. That's right. This world has indeed existed for countless years. Under normal circumstances, not to mention the first great tribulation of heaven and earth, it might even pass through the seventh or eighth great tribulation of heaven and earth. However, this world has always had a weakness. It's this weakness that caused this world to never have a great tribulation of heaven and earth. The great calamity of the world has never descended, so the world has always maintained its previous state," said the World Emperor. Luo Fan suddenly understood. Before this world was not complete, so it didn't trigger the great tribulation of heaven and earth. "That's right. It's just as you think. This world was not complete, so it didn't trigger the great tribulation of heaven and earth." "That's right. Before fellow Taoists came, I was in an incomplete state. This state can't trigger the great tribulation of heaven and earth that only a complete world can trigger. So, even though this world has existed for countless years, it has never passed through a great tribulation of heaven and earth. All this time, it has always maintained its previous state. No increase or decrease, no tribulation and no limit. The World Emperor said leisurely. However, this situation has changed with your arrival, fellow Taoist. Back then, you created those living beings and formed those civilized countries. It broke the incomplete state of this world. It caused this world to evolve rapidly. Finally, not long ago, it completed the crucial step and completed the reincarnation cycle of heaven and earth. This triggered the great tribulation of heaven and earth. So that's how it is. Luo Fan smiled bitterly. The great tribulation of heaven and earth was a huge opportunity for the world. After passing through the great tribulation of heaven and earth, the world would be able to grow tremendously. But at the same time, it was also a huge danger to the world. If they were not careful, the great tribulation of heaven and earth could completely destroy this world. This perfect world would eventually disappear into a state of chaos, and all traces of existence would be completely erased. It was precisely because the great tribulation of heaven and earth was so dangerous that the World Emperor's attitude towards Luo Fan was so complicated. Because the great tribulation of heaven and earth had appeared because of Luo Fan. If it wasn't for Luo Fan's method to make this world complete, if it wasn't for the civilized countries he built to truly break the primordial state of this world, how could the great tribulation of heaven and earth have descended? Without the great tribulation of heaven and earth, although the world wouldn't have the chance to continue growing, it wouldn't be in danger of being destroyed. Although this great tribulation of heaven and earth is the first great tribulation of heaven and earth, it has been suppressed for countless years, so its power will definitely be extremely terrifying. Even with our existence, the possibility of us surviving it is extremely small. The World Emperor sighed. A normal great tribulation of heaven and earth would only appear a few 100 million years after the world was established, or at most a few 100 million years later. After that, the time between each great tribulation of the heavens and earth would continue to increase until the 8th or 9th great tribulation of the heavens and earth. The time between each great tribulation of the heavens and earth would only be calculated in trillions of years. But now, since the birth of this world, the number of years that it had experienced could not even be counted by trillions of years. Although there was an objective reason why the great tribulation of heaven and earth hadn't appeared after such a long time, it was also equivalent to the world suppressing the great tribulation of heaven and earth for such a long time. In this way, the power of the suppressed great tribulation of heaven and earth would be countless times stronger than a normal great tribulation. Listening to the World Emperor's endless description of the great tribulation of heaven and earth, Luo Fan's heart sank in hesitation. No matter how powerful the great tribulation of heaven and earth was, it wouldn't affect his life since he possessed the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light. After all, even if the world was completely destroyed, he could hide in the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light and continue existing. However, if the world couldn't survive the great tribulation of heaven and earth and was completely destroyed in the great tribulation of heaven and earth, then he would suffer a considerable loss. First of all, he would no longer be able to use the environment of this world to perfect his worldview. Secondly, everything he'd set up in this world would be destroyed, and it was equivalent to everything he'd done in this world would be for naught and become useless. These two reasons made it difficult for him to sit back and watch this world being destroyed in the great tribulation of heaven and earth. What kind of person was the World Emperor? How could he not see that Luo Fan's heart was already shaken at this moment? He was overjoyed and said, "Fellow Taoist, you don't have to worry. I can make them not cause trouble for you. Moreover, I can also make them pay a sufficient price to apologize to you." Sufficient price? What do they have that I need? Luo Fan said plainly. Of course they do. If they don't have anything that you need, how could they threaten you? The World Emperor laughed. Hearing this, Luo Fan's eyes lit up. He looked at the seed of chaos in the middle of the Ju Huang and the others. Indeed, if the price was the primal chaos seed, it would indeed pique his interest. It was enough to offset the fact that they had attacked him before. I will never give up the seed of chaos. At this moment, the Zhu Huang gritted his teeth and said, before this, during the conversation between Luo Fan and the Zhu Huang and the others heard everything. At that time, the humiliation in their hearts didn't need to be described. It almost made them want to self-destruct immediately. However, they were, after all, rational supreme emperors. Even if they felt humiliated, they knew that the world emperor had spoken. This was their last chance. Although they thought that Luo Fan couldn't do anything to them before, they thought that Luo Fan really couldn't do anything to them. In fact, they were quite clear that although Luo Fan couldn't do anything to them at this moment, it was only because they could still activate the seed of chaos. If they couldn't activate the seed of chaos at any time, then what awaited them would definitely be an absolutely powerful blow from Luo Fan. This kind of blow, according to Luo Fan's determination at this time, was certainly enough to be fatal. It was precisely because they were aware of this situation that they could only endure even if they were humiliated. They pinned their hopes on the World Emperor, hoping that the World Emperor could persuade Luo Fan to let them go. It was also because of this that the formation had always been wooden and didn't have any holes. However, at this moment, they actually wanted to give up the seed of chaos. The Zhu Huang finally didn't agree. One must know that the seed of chaos belonged to the Zhu Huang himself. It was a treasure that he had paid a huge price and spent a lot of effort to obtain. Although it wasn't as precious as the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light, it was thousands of times more precious than any other pseudo-origin spiritual treasure. Under such circumstances, how could he be willing to give up the seed of chaos in exchange for Luo Fan to let them go? Hearing this, Luo Fan looked at the World Emperor indifferently. Although he didn't say anything, his meaning couldn't be more obvious. This problem had to be solved by the World Emperor. The World Emperor frowned and said, Taoist Zhu Huang, is this seed of chaos more important than your life? Although it's not as important as my life, it's not much different from my life. The Zhu Huang gritted his teeth. His voice was filled with strong unwillingness and determination. Just by listening to his voice, one could hear his determination to live and die together with the seed of chaos. Hearing this, the World Emperor said indifferently, Taoist Zhu Huang is willing to die together with the seed of chaos. Are the other Taoists also willing? This is my seed of chaos. The Zhu Huang gritted his teeth and said, Taoist Zhu Huang, we shouldn't speak, but this matter concerns our lives, so we have to say it. At this moment, another Supreme Emperor's voice came from around the seed of chaos. Although the seed of chaos is yours now, it's only for now. If you die, the seed of chaos will eventually fall into the hands of the Luo Emperor. For the Luo Emperor, that's just a little more troublesome. The Zhu Huang sneered, I'm willing. This item is as precious as my life. I'm willing to die with it. Taoist Zhu Huang, why are you so stubborn? If you don't give up on this item, then you'll lose it along with your life. If you give up on this item, you'll be able to keep your life that's as precious as this item. So why not? The other Supreme Emperor said. At this moment, the Zhu Huang only gritted his teeth and didn't say anything. His stubborn appearance made the other emperors extremely anxious. Chapter 17:19. Zhu Huang gritted his teeth and was unwilling no matter what. The reason was not that he would rather die together with the seed of primal chaos. Luo Fan and the Realm Emperor could clearly see his intention. He was clearly upset that the other supreme rulers weren't willing to pay the price. He wanted the other supreme rulers to pay the price to make up for his loss. Luo Fan and the Realm Emperor could see it clearly. The other supreme rulers weren't much weaker than them, so they naturally could see it clearly as well. However, at this moment, they were still avoiding the topic and pretending not to see it. They were clearly playing dumb. It was this attitude that made the Emperor Zhu even more dissatisfied. That was why he was even more resolute. The Realm Emperor said those words when he saw their expressions. The other supreme rulers were silent when they heard the Realm Emperor's words. If the Realm Emperor didn't speak, they could continue to play dumb. After all, They could say that they didn't think of it and didn't know the Emperor Ju's true intentions. However, it was obvious that the situation had completely changed when the Realm Emperor spoke. The Realm Emperor had appeared here to save them and stop Luo Fan. No matter what his intentions were, they had to accept his kindness and know how to be grateful. Now that he had made the situation clear, if they continued to play dumb and say that they didn't understand, they wouldn't be arguing with the Emperor Ju anymore. They would be not giving the Realm Emperor any face. If they didn't give him face, the Realm Emperor would have a reason to leave at any time and ignore them. When that time came, they would be the ones to suffer. All the Supreme Sovereigns knew this very well. At this moment, the entire place was silent. After a long while, one of the Sovereigns said, "I don't have any treasures that can compare to the seed of chaos. However, I once obtained a world that was born from a state of chaos. Perhaps it can make up for your loss." As he spoke, the other Supreme Rulers didn't dare to show weakness anymore. They all spoke up. This one said that he had a pseudo-chaotic spiritual treasure. He had refined it for billions of years. Although it couldn't compare to the seed of chaos, it was still quite impressive. This one said that he once obtained the inheritance of a level 3 Supreme Ruler. Although it wasn't a physical object, it was still extremely precious. It was beneficial to the Emperor Ju's cultivation. Just like this, they all spoke up and took out the treasures that they thought could satisfy the Emperor Ju. Seeing them like this, the World Emperor's expression relaxed a little. Compared to the seed of chaos, the countless treasures that they had taken out were naturally not as valuable as it. But, according to their strength, it was already extremely rare for them to take out these treasures. It was enough to show their sincerity. The Emperor Ju fell into silence when he heard their words. Obviously, he wasn't very satisfied with the compensation they had given him. "Although the treasures we've brought out are far inferior to what you've offered, we'll still be able to provide you with some treasures." Ju was the Emperor. If Dao Friend is still not satisfied, then there is nothing we can do. A Supreme Emperor said. What he took out, it was a world of mysteries, and there were even some mysteries hidden within it that he could not understand. To him, that world was already the most precious treasure he could take out. If it wasn't for the fact that his life was on the line, he wouldn't be willing to take it out. At this moment, he was extremely reluctant to part with it. He was thinking of all kinds of ways to get back what he had paid. Hearing his words, the other Supreme Sovereigns expressed similar sentiments. The Emperor Ju knew that he couldn't get anything out of it. Even if he was extremely reluctant to part with it, he could only sigh. In the end, he could only sigh. "Fine. Although all of this can't make up for my loss, it's for my own life. I'll give this seed of chaos to Emperor Luo in exchange for our lives." The World King smiled and said, "Life is the most important thing. Fellow Taoists have made the right choice." After saying that, he turned to Luo Fan and said, "I wonder if you're satisfied?" Luo Fan nodded. "I'm barely satisfied." As he spoke, the connate, inextinguishable spiritual aura flickered and the seed of chaos was released. In an instant, the spherical shape had already transformed into its original shape of a long river. Immediately afterwards, the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light in the shape of a long river trembled slightly and attached itself to his back. With a slight turn, it formed a ring of light and attached itself to his back. It looked as if his body was glowing. Facing such a change, the World King's pupils shrank. This kind of control over the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light had already surpassed the limits of what he could achieve. At this moment, he began to look at Luo Fan in a completely new light, and he began to speculate about Luo Fan's strength. Perhaps this person is indeed stronger than me. In such a short period of time, he grew from an existence that wasn't a ruler to this stage. It seems like he really is the true divine seed. Such a thought flashed across his mind. However, this wasn't the time to dwell on this. The lives of the Emperor Ju and the others were more important. Or, to be more precise, it was the great tribulation of this world. At this moment, as Luo Fan released the chaotic state, Zhu Huang and the others felt their bodies loosen up. The inexplicable power that had tightly bound them and made them unable to escape, and lose their freedom disappeared without a trace in an instant. At this moment, they felt that they could control their bodies again. They felt that they could finally break the formation. When they realized this, all the Supreme Emperors instantly took action. They quickly withdrew their power. As they retracted their powers, the chaotic state began to gradually collapse. Endless time, space, matter, and energy, the four basic existences, were born at this moment. They surged into the surroundings, causing the starry sky that had been transformed to collapse in an instant. As the starry sky collapsed, the four basic existences that evolved from the seed of chaos quickly merged with it. They gradually changed the structure of the space-time, causing the collapsed space-time to return to its original appearance, the appearance of a normal space-time. After that, the changes didn't stop. The four basic existences continued to merge with it and continued to change the structure of the space-time. At this moment, Luo Fan made a move. His heart stirred. The four basic existences quickly gathered, and in the blink of an eye, the palace and sacred mountain that collapsed due to the battle were reconstructed. Moreover, this reconstruction wasn't just restoring it to its original state. He didn't just restore it to its original state. Instead, he used all the means he could to improve the structure and quality of the sacred mountain and the palace as much as possible, making the palace and the sacred mountain become more and more advanced. The space inside the palace continued to expand. Not long after, it had already expanded into a vast and boundless space-time. There was no end in sight. The seed of chaos only seemed to be a little bit, not much. But in fact, this seed of chaos was enough to evolve into a perfect world. Such existences transformed into the four basic existences, and their numbers were great. It was self-evident. With such a large number of the four basic existences compressed and condensed on the sacred mountain and palace, the effect it produced was huge. Needless to say, this kind of performance wasn't something to be surprised about. The evolution of the seed of chaos itself gave birth to the existence of time. Under such circumstances, it was naturally meaningless to say how much time had passed during the entire evolution process. In a trance, it was as if countless trillions of years had passed, or as if it was just the blink of an eye, all the changes had calmed down. The seed of chaos had completely disappeared. Even the four fundamental existences had been completely absorbed by the sacred mountain and the palace. As the seed of chaos completely disappeared, the emperor and the other supreme emperors felt their bodies lighten and broke free from that mysterious state. His entire body floated in the air, and there was no longer any illusory aspect to it. In the eyes of Luo Fan and the world emperor, the 20-plus people had already regained their original feeling. They only needed to think about it, and they would never be able to reincarnate. As for the seed of chaos, it had shrunk to its original size. It was quietly hovering above the palm of Zhu Huang, who had just stretched out his hand, rotating slightly, as if there was a boundless world contained within it. Looking at the seed of chaos in his palm, Emperor Zhu had a look of reluctance on his face. This was the seed of chaos that could guide the seed of chaos into this world. Under normal circumstances, even a third great emperor would lose his life if he was careless and was attacked by the seed of chaos, never to be reincarnated. But now, for the sake of his life, he had no choice but to hand over the seed of chaos. He had no choice but to give it to his enemy, to the existence that he wanted to crush. Such a contrast. This caused his emotions to become extremely complicated, and it was difficult for him to remain as calm as before. At this time, the other supreme emperors all bowed to Emperor Zhu. Then, one by one, they grabbed all kinds of things that they had agreed on before for various places and handed them over to Zhu Huang. Every one of them had a look of reluctance on their faces. Obviously, even if these treasures weren't as important as the seed of chaos to Emperor Zhu, they were definitely not much inferior. It was enough to make their hearts ache, and they were extremely reluctant to part with them. Of course, it was difficult for even Luo Fan to tell how much of their expressions were real and how much was fake. Perhaps Some of the treasures that the Supreme Emperors took out were indeed extremely precious to him and made him feel extremely heartache and reluctant to part with them. But there were some that weren't that important. However, this was the deepest thought in their hearts. Even Luo Fan and the Emperor Zhu couldn't detect it. Zhu Huang collected all the treasures handed over by them with a numb look on his face. Every time he collected a treasure, he would check it once. Every time he took one, his expression would turn ugly. Of course, this wasn't because these treasures were inferior to what he had previously thought, which was why his expression was so ugly. In fact, these treasures weren't much different from what he had previously known. Their preciousness hadn't decreased by much. The reason why his expression turned uglier every time he took one and examined it was because the appearance of each of these treasures allowed him to clearly discover the disparity between these treasures and the seed of chaos. Every time a treasure appeared, it was equivalent to confirming to him how precious the seed of chaos was and how much he had sacrificed. Under such circumstances, how could he possibly look good? No matter how reluctant he was, no matter how uncomfortable he felt, he couldn't keep those treasures forever. Not long after, when the last Supreme Emperor handed over his treasures to Emperor Zhu finally couldn't delay any longer. He could only send the seed of chaos to Luo Fan with an incomparably unsightly expression. The seed of chaos itself was an extremely mysterious and profound existence. The influence of the surrounding space-time on it was simply negligible. Under such circumstances, Emperor Zhu didn't need to go through any process when he sent the seed of chaos to Luo Fan. The seed of chaos had already appeared in front of Luo Fan. He easily grabbed it in his hand. The seed of chaos was in his hand. Luo Fan had an indescribable feeling. In a trance, he seemed to have grasped countless worlds. It was as if he had grasped in endless heaven and earth. An indescribable heaviness was emitted from the seed of chaos. Under this heaviness, he felt as if his body's movements had become difficult. He even felt as if he couldn't circulate his own strength. It seemed as if he needed to consume tens of millions of times more strength than before. What a wonderful seed of chaos! At this moment, such a thought flashed across Luo Fan's mind. His perception was extremely powerful, yet he instantly discovered that this heaviness wasn't because the seed of chaos was truly incomparably heavy. It had almost reached the limit that he couldn't bear. Instead, it was simply a concept that was deeper and firmer than any concept that Luo Fan had encountered in the past. Although it was only a concept, compared to the various spiritual lights that were condensed from concepts, this concept was countless times stronger. He even felt that as long as there was a trace or a little bit of this concept, it would be enough to crush all spiritual lights. It was even enough to make Luo Fan's spiritual light that was formed from the fusion of two sources unable to bear it. He understood the source of this heaviness, but this didn't mean that he could get rid of it. The seed of chaos was still incomparably heavy in his hand. It was still so heavy that he was almost unable to move. Brother Luo Huang, now that they've paid the price, shall I take them away? The Realm Emperor said with a smile. Hearing this, Luo Fan only nodded and didn't speak. When the Realm Emperor saw this, he smiled slightly and looked at the seed of chaos in Luo Fan's hand with an indescribable expression. There was a faint hint of envy in his eyes. Then, he turned to Zhu Huang and the others and said, "In order to reassure Brother Luo Huang and all of you, you can cultivate in my cave abode from now on. You can come out when the calamity of this world descends. What do you think?" Zhu Huang and the others were naturally unwilling to go to the Realm Emperor's cave. After all, they would be safe and they wouldn't have to worry about Luo Fan attacking them. However, at the same time, this would also result in the loss of their freedom. What was the difference between cultivating in the Realm Emperor's cave abode and coming out when the calamity of this world descended from being imprisoned? However, things had already developed to this stage, so what could they do even if they were unwilling? They believed that if they dared to reject the Realm Emperor at this time, then Luo Fan might kill them along the way. Not to mention that they had already agreed not to do anything to them. To existences like them, although words weren't nonsense, the restraining power wasn't so strong that it couldn't be broken. Therefore, at this moment, Zhu Huang and the others could only bow to the Realm Emperor and say, "Thank you, Brother Realm Emperor, for providing a safe place for us to cultivate. Don't worry, I'm not imprisoning you. I have a connate, inextinguishable spiritual light. Although I can't give it to you, I can let you cultivate in it. It's fine," the Realm Emperor said with a smile. Hearing his words, the eyes of Zhu Huang and the others lit up. At this moment, they were no longer dissatisfied with going to the Realm Emperor's cave. Instead, their hearts were filled with endless anticipation. What was the most precious thing in this world? For this question, anyone who knew what kind of existence the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light was, they would definitely be able to name the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light. Emperors like Zhu Huang and the others naturally knew about the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light. Under such circumstances, when they heard that the Realm Emperor was willing to open the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light for them to comprehend and cultivate, they felt like they were opening a rice jar to mice. "Thank you, Brother Realm Emperor." At this instant, even Zhu Huang had a faint smile on his face as he bowed to the Realm Emperor to express his gratitude. Seeing this, the Realm Emperor only smiled lightly and didn't say anything. After bowing to Luo Fan, he raised his hand and grabbed at the air. In an instant, an unknown force grabbed hold of Zhu Huang and the others. Then, this force slightly shrunk, and Zhu Huang and the others instantly disappeared in front of the barrier between the world and the state of chaos. When they reappeared, they were directly thrown into the simulated state of chaos where the Realm Emperor's cave was located and fell into a hazy state. Luo Fan looked at all this, but just smiled faintly. The Realm Emperor's intention. He was naturally extremely clear about it. The Realm Emperor used such a method to show him that he saved Zhu Huang and the others. It was only to resist the great calamity of the world. The Realm Emperor didn't have any opinions about him, nor did he have any good impression of Zhu Huang and the others. Facing the Realm Emperor's worries, Luo Fan only smiled faintly, although he didn't completely let go of the grudge against Zhu Huang and the others. Actually, he no longer saw them as a threat to him. Without the seed of chaos, these 20 or so martial monarchs were like ants to him. If they wanted to deal with him again, he didn't even need to use the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light. As long as he gave away the fragment of the primordial spirit treasure, it would be enough to erase all of them. After a smile, Luo Fan withdrew the silhouette that he had thrown into the barrier between the world and the state of chaos. Then, he sat on the throne that was reconstructed in the palace. At this moment, the throne that he was sitting on let out such sounds. Amidst the sounds, one could vaguely see countless cracks suddenly appearing on the throne. These cracks were fine and dense, directly wrapping up the entire throne, causing the throne to no longer look as complete as it originally was. Instead, it looked like it was completely constructed from countless fine fragments. Even this throne can't bear the concept of heaviness. Luo Fan instantly understood what was going on. With a thought, waves of spiritual light poured into the throne below. As the spiritual light poured in, the countless cracks on the throne quickly healed. In the blink of an eye, they completely disappeared, becoming unprecedentedly stable and sturdy. This was the fusion of the two spiritual lights that Luo Fan had poured into the throne, using the fusion of spiritual light to bear the concept of heaviness. As a result, the throne itself wouldn't be affected by the concept of heaviness. In the end, the throne would remain intact and wouldn't suffer any damage. The fusion of the two spiritual lights was inferior to the concept of heaviness that the seed of chaos emitted. This was without a doubt. However, the difference between the two wasn't too great. Under such a difference, when the fusion of the two spiritual lights reached a certain level, it would be able to have a powerful effect on the concept of heaviness. Under the concept of heaviness, it was very normal for the throne to be protected. After all, This concept of heaviness was only emitted by the seed of chaos, and the quantity itself was quite limited. Compared to the endless quantity of the fusion of spiritual lights that Luo Fan had, it was still far inferior. After leaving a large portion of the fusion of spiritual lights in the throne, Luo Fan began to carefully sense the seed of chaos in his hand. Chapter 17:20. Luo Fan carefully sensed the grayish seed of chaos in his hand and felt that there were countless layers of structure within it. Every layer of structure was so complicated and mysterious. As for the seed of chaos, even Luo Fan felt a little dizzy when he saw these layers of structure. In a trance, it was as if these structures contained mysteries that exceeded the limits of his understanding. What a great seed of chaos! The moment Luo Fan saw these structures, he couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. He already had his guesses, but now that he saw its structure clearly, he was truly sure that the seed of chaos before him was similar to a magic treasure, and it was refined by a certain cultivator. When he realized this, his perception of this seed of chaos was completely different from before. If the seed of chaos was only a natural product, such as some kind of existence that was born from the state of chaos, then even though he felt that it was extremely mysterious and had incredible effects, he would only put it aside after studying it for a while. After all, if that was the case, there wasn't much difference in essence compared to the state of chaos. To comprehend such a seed of chaos, it would be more convenient to directly comprehend the state of chaos. However, it was obvious that this wasn't the case for the seed of chaos at this moment. This was clearly a layered structure that was clearly refined by a cultivator in all sorts of complicated forms, but it could be used on the state of chaos. It could trigger and control the state of chaos. The situation was completely different. Compared to a situation where it was naturally formed, this kind of layered structure was like using countless parts to construct an extremely complicated machine with all kinds of incredible effects. The former was difficult to learn, but the latter could be replicated. With this difference, one could see the change in Luo Fan's attitude toward this seed of chaos. With a thought, he raised his hand and pointed at the seed of chaos. Boundless power was instantly poured into the seed of chaos. This power was extremely pure and powerful. It was extremely pure and powerful. Although it was not the most powerful fusion of spiritual light that he currently possessed, it was still not a power that ordinary cultivators could condense. The moment this kind of power poured into the seed of chaos, it was greatly weakened by the layers of structure inside the seed of chaos. In that instant, his power was only able to penetrate one layer of the structure before it was completely used up, and in the process, however, he did not have much insight into the structure of the first level. It felt like this structure was unimaginably complex. In a trance, there seemed to be an unknown number of incomparably detailed worlds outlined by countless lines, densely glued together, forming an incomparably complex and even more unpredictable structure. These lines were formed by a power that Luo Fan could not understand. Every single line contained endless principles. It contained a terrifying might that could completely shatter a part of the world. At this moment, there were an endless number of such lines within the seeds of chaos. They shrunk into small seeds. They were combined in a way that exceeded the limits of Luo Fan's understanding. And they also flowed and changed within the seed of chaos with a law that Luo Fan could not understand, faintly revealing all kinds of mysteries that seemed to reach the state of chaos. The one who constructed this seed of chaos must be a true saint. At this moment, Luo Fan made a judgment. Back when he was still on Earth, he had seen the mysteries of the Path of the Sage at Wu Daozi's Qilin Cliff. The rune structure that described the Path of the Sage back then, it seemed to be this inexplicable structure. Of course, that was the essence of the structure. In terms of direct performance, there was naturally a huge difference between the two. With my current power, I can't directly explore the mysteries within. In an instant, he came to a realization. In this realization, Luo Fan knew that he could not continue like this. With a thought, He raised his hand and gently waved. He raised his hand and waved gently. The halo that floated behind his head trembled slightly and turned into a long river that appeared in front of him. It crossed the vast space-time inside the hall. This long river was naturally the connate inextinguishable spirit light. At this moment, his clone's breakthrough process was still not over. There were still endless mysteries of the connate inextinguishable spirit light constantly pouring into the mind of his clone and his main body, causing his understanding of the connate inextinguishable spirit light to become deeper and deeper. Under such circumstances, he was able to control the connate inextinguishable spiritual light more freely than at any other time in the past. Moreover, this degree of control was constantly improving as time passed. Looking at the connate inextinguishable spirit light, Luo Fan stood up with some difficulty. He had yet to comprehend or refine the seed of chaos, so the heavy concept from the seed of chaos was still affecting him. Therefore, it was naturally rather difficult for him to move at this moment. After standing up, he took a step forward and disappeared from the space-time inside the hall. When he reappeared, he was not in the space-time or anywhere outside the space-time, but somewhere inside the connate inextinguishable spirit light. It was a place that was enveloped by countless strange space-time, and there was a chaotic aura that constantly seeped out. Obviously, this was the place that Luo Fan had specially opened up, the place that was directly adjacent to the chaotic state. After arriving here, the heavy concept emitted by the seed of chaos had brazenly crushed the layers of space-time around the chaotic state. At this moment, the streams of chaos aura could only linger on their last breaths as they drifted around that place that led directly to the chaos state. At the same time, the surrounding world seemed to be unable to withstand the pressure of the heavy concept. All of them seemed to be operating at a much slower speed. The communication between the worlds seemed to have decreased a lot because of this at this moment. The Light Emperor and the others, who had been refined, suddenly appeared out of thin air, not far away. Previously, when Luo Fan manipulated the connate inextinguishable spirit light to release the chaotic state, allowing the Assembly Emperor and the others to regain their freedom and relax, the Light Emperor and the other Supreme Emperors had already completely recovered. After that, they even began to walk and cultivate inside the connate inextinguishable spirit light. The reason why they gathered here was obviously very simple. At this moment, the heavy concept emitted by the seed of chaos had caused an indescribable impact on the connate inextinguishable spirit light. Yes, the connate inextinguishable spirit light had already felt indescribable damage. After arriving here, the Light Emperor and the others looked at Luo Fan with an indescribable look in their eyes. Immediately after, they bowed to Luo Fan, and their powers began to erupt as they began to communicate with each other. In the blink of an eye, a huge defensive formation was constructed around Luo Fan's body. When Luo Fan saw this defensive formation, his eyes slightly lit up. This was because he had already discovered that this defensive formation was inexplicably similar to the formation that the Assembly Emperor and the others had constructed when they activated the seed of chaos and guided the chaotic state to attack him. This was obviously the formation that the Light Emperor and the others had constructed now. It was a formation that the Light Emperor and the others had comprehended from the formation that the Assembly Emperor and the others had constructed. It was a formation that specifically targeted the seed of chaos. This was not strange at all. After all, the Light Emperor and the others before him were their original bodies. Back then, they had also contributed to the formation. Now that they had been refined by the connate inextinguishable spirit light, it did not mean that they had completely lost their past memories and could still remember the situation back then. But it was a matter of course, using their past memories to deduce a new concept that completely targeted the heavy concept emitted by the seed of chaos. It was not strange at all. How sharp was Luo Fan's perception? At this moment, the moment the formation was completed, he had already completely understood all the key points, all the details, and all the principles of the formation. As he comprehended all these, his eyes suddenly revealed an indescribable sense of enlightenment. Through these various comprehensions, his understanding of the seed of chaos suddenly deepened a lot. In a daze, he discovered that the heavy concept emitted by the seed of chaos seemed to have slightly weakened, of course. It was only a sliver. After carefully sensing the surrounding formation, he realized that no matter what he did, he could not further deepen his understanding. After the heavy concept's pressure decreased, Luo Fan could only turn his attention back to the goal that he had come here for, which was the gray chaotic state in front of him. It was naturally impossible for him to directly come into contact with the chaotic state, unless he wanted to commit suicide. Therefore, at this moment, Luo Fan only stopped a few feet away from the chaotic state. When he arrived here, with a thought, the seed of chaos in his hand slowly floated up. The indescribable radiance on the seed of chaos began to produce mysterious fluctuations. Amidst these fluctuations, the chaotic state also began to produce inexplicable fluctuations. This fluctuation was not strong, but it was extremely obvious. It made Luo Fan feel as if his mind was about to sink into the fluctuation. Even the feeling that he had been suppressing before, that he was about to completely immerse himself in the mysterious state of chaos, had become stronger and more difficult to suppress. As for the unique space-time dimension that completely belonged to him, it had already become fragmented. There was no longer any trace of it that completely suited him. With a thought, Luo Fan raised his hand and grabbed at the void. In an instant, a bronze mirror broke through the air and appeared directly above his head. This bronze mirror was none other than the primordial origin spirit treasure that was formed from a part of the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light. The moment the primordial origin spirit treasure arrived here, it naturally produced a powerful effect. The surrounding space-time dimension was instantly replaced by a more resolute space-time dimension. The originally fragmented dimensions were instantly smoothed out and completely integrated into the space-time dimension that the primordial origin spirit treasure came with as this change occurred. He felt as if there was an additional layer of distance between him and the chaotic state. There was an additional small, seemingly imperceptible, but incomparably sturdy gap that was enough to block everything. With this gap, the feeling that he needed to completely suppress and immerse himself in the mysterious state of chaos naturally disappeared. His mind, because of this, he regained absolute autonomy. At this step, Luo Fan heaved a sigh of relief. He quietly stood there with an inexplicable expression on his face. He raised his hand and gently pointed at the seed of chaos in his hand. A steady stream of power poured into the seed of chaos. As he poured his power into it, the fluctuations of the seed of chaos began to slowly increase. As the ripples from the primal chaos seed increased, the ripples from the primal chaos state in front of him also began to increase. He could faintly feel the fluctuations of the chaotic state in front of him. Strands of the chaotic state seemed to want to break away from the chaotic state and enter the seed of chaos. At this time, the power he poured into the seed of chaos was being consumed at an indescribable rate. Almost at every moment, the power that he consumed could create millions of worlds. As the power was consumed, the first layer of the seed of chaos began to undergo an inexplicable change. Vaguely, there seemed to be an inexplicable sense of familiarity slowly spreading out, slowly seeping into Luo Fan's power and soul. Amidst this feeling, the heavy concept that was constantly emanating from the seed of chaos and continuously pressuring him. At this moment, it began to gradually weaken. This process continued without end. After an unknown period of time, he suddenly felt that the heavy concept that the seed of chaos emitted had completely disappeared. In his hand, the seed of chaos was practically non-existent. At the same time, he also felt that the seed of chaos revealed an incomparably familiar feeling. It was as if it had become a weapon in his hand. Although it still didn't feel like it had become a part of him, relatively speaking, it was already a world of difference compared to its previous appearance that was like a brewing disaster. This It should be considered as having gained initial control over the seed of chaos, right? This thought flashed across Luo Fan's mind. He thought about it for a while and knew that the power that he had poured into the seed of chaos was enough to create trillions of worlds. If it weren't for the fact that he could create power out of thin air at any time, not to mention such a long period of time, he might not be able to achieve this even if he had another trillions of years. However, even though he had gained initial control over the seed of chaos, he still didn't know what exactly it was, what mysteries it had, and what mysteries it had. It felt like a primitive man who had obtained a computer, and after countless trials and tribulations, he finally knew how to turn on the computer. He could barely use the computer, but he couldn't figure out the principles of the computer no matter how hard he tried. Sensing that the relationship between him and the seed of chaos had changed, Luo Fan had a thought and transmitted his 1 year into the seed of chaos. In an instant, an indescribable suction force erupted from within the seed of chaos and directly acted on the state of chaos through some mysterious pathway. Following that, the state of chaos in front of Luo Fan suddenly produced an indescribable chaos. In this chaos, the state of chaos seemed to have lost a part of it. Immediately after, the seed of chaos suddenly expanded by size. The sense of heaviness that had disappeared before suddenly increased by 1,000 times. Gaga gaga, all sorts of extremely horrifying sounds came from Luo Fan's body in an instant. In a trance, he even felt that there were countless cracks in the internal space-time in his body. It seemed as if countless space-time were about to collapse in the next instant. Faced with this situation, Luo Fan finally understood why the Emperor Ju needed so many people's help to activate the seed of chaos back then. If no one else shared this heavy concept, with the strength of the Emperor Ju, he would probably be crushed by this heavy concept within a few breaths of time. In that case, he wouldn't be able to deal with Luo Fan at all. He would be tormented by the seed of chaos first. After understanding the power of this heavy concept, how would Luo Fan dare to be negligent? With a thought, the bronze mirror floating above his head suddenly shot out a ray of light and directly enveloped him. This light was so mysterious and incredible. After it appeared, it naturally revealed a kind of eternal indestructibility, undefeatable by thousands of tribulations. Mysterious charm. Along with the shroud of this light, Luo Fan felt his whole body and mind relax. The gagaga sound from within his body also disappeared completely. It seemed that the chaos origin spiritual treasure had completely taken over the concept of heaviness and didn't have any effect on Luo Fan anymore. No matter what, this concept of heaviness was only emitted by the seed of chaos. Fundamentally speaking, it came from the state of chaos. To Luo Fan, who was only a supreme emperor and not a true sage, such a heavy concept was hard to understand. Naturally, it was an existence so powerful that it was difficult to resist. However, to a true sage, this kind of concept was nothing. It was impossible for it to cause any fundamental damage to a true sage. Obviously, this primordial origin spiritual treasure was a true divine level existence. He took over the heavy concept, and perhaps there would not be no changes to it. They would not be completely unaffected, but they would definitely not be like Luo Fan. It was almost unbearable. Feeling the heavy feeling disappear, Luo Fan's expression relaxed. He finally had the energy to observe what kind of changes had happened to the seed of chaos. At this moment, a strand of a chaotic state was faintly discernible in the depths of the chaotic seed, and it was transforming into all sorts of strange light and shadows that formed an extremely profound and boundlessly profound world. It was constantly pushing the internal structure of the seed of chaos. However, this change was happening in the deepest part of the layers of the seed of chaos. It was unknown how many hundreds of millions of layers there were. At this moment, whether it was his spirit or strength, Luo Fan could only reach the outermost layer of the seed of chaos. Therefore, although he faintly felt that there was an extremely mysterious change happening in the depths of the seed of chaos. However, he didn't understand the specific situation of this change at all. My strength is still not enough after all. Luo Fan sighed. At this moment, he deeply understood why Zhu Huang didn't set his goal of comprehending the mysteries of the Great Tao, even though he had obtained the seed of chaos long ago. Instead, he set his goal of comprehending the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light that didn't belong to him. As he sighed in his heart, Luo Fan took action again. Following the inexplicable feeling in his heart, he brazenly poured his thoughts into the seed of chaos floating above his palm. In an instant, the seed of chaos shook slightly. The chaotic state that appeared out of nowhere in the depths of the seed of chaos was suddenly sent out. It wasn't sent to any other place, but directly back into the chaotic state. The moment the chaotic state returned to its source, a strange wave was suddenly produced in the depths of the chaotic state. It directly swept across the entire chaotic state and even his mind. In a trance, there seemed to be countless truths and mysteries poured into his mind through this wave. It made him seem to understand something, but also seem to know nothing at the same time. This feeling suddenly made Luo Fan a little dazed. There was an inexplicable sense of loss in his eyes. "What is this?" he murmured. He carefully searched for what he had comprehended, but realized that no matter how he searched and how deep he dug, he couldn't find it. He couldn't dig out what he had comprehended before. It felt as if everything he had comprehended before was simply an illusion. For this kind of situation, Luo Fan had already encountered it many times. Although he was still a little unwilling in his heart, the irritation caused by it in the past no longer appeared. After taking a few deep breaths, he had already suppressed all sorts of negative emotions. Chapter 17:21. Such a high-level comprehension might not bring too many benefits to his current strength. It wouldn't directly transform into his cultivation realm, but it would solidify his foundation. From now on, it would be easier for him to comprehend new principles and mysteries. In other words, the difficulty of breaking through a bottleneck would also be reduced. In other words, this kind of comprehension would bring him countless benefits in the future. How could Luo Fan not be happy when he knew this? Without any hesitation, he poured his consciousness into the seed of chaos again, causing it to produce an inexplicable suction force that acted on the chaotic state ahead. The chaotic state produced an inexplicable vibration, and a part of it was poured into the depths of the seed of chaos through the mysterious suction force, causing the seed of chaos to become heavier once again. This time, Luo Fan didn't just put on a show like before and then ended it. Instead, he did his best to guide as much chaotic state as possible out of the chaotic state ahead, causing more and more chaotic state to gather in the seed of chaos, making the heavy concept of the chaotic state even more intense. At this moment, one could finally see how complicated the internal structure of the seed of chaos was. In an instant, endless worlds, endless space-time, and endless lights and shadows emerged on the surface of the seed of chaos. These worlds, space-time, and lights and shadows were beyond Luo Fan's imagination. It felt as though a supreme existence that far surpassed Luo Fan was displaying its means on the seed of chaos. As for the internal structure of the seed of chaos, every single one of them seemed to be activated. All the tiny structures produced an incomparably complex linkage. In this linkage, the entire seed of chaos seemed to be about to explode and transform into a cluster of worlds. However, this feeling of being about to explode was obviously just an illusion. In the next instant, the countless structures had already digested the feeling of being on the verge of exploding, and all the structures had regained their stability. However, it was a completely different stable structure than before. It looked as if all the details of the structure had undergone earth-shattering changes. However, it was a pity that even after the changes, the structure was still so mysterious and incredible. Luo Fan looked at the structure and was still confused. He couldn't understand what was going on with the structure, nor could he find the mystery behind it. Floating there quietly, Luo Fan had an inexplicable expression on his face. Then he sighed. He sent his will into the seed of primal chaos again, causing the seed of primal chaos to tremble slightly. The seed of primal chaos sent the primal chaos contained within it back to the primal chaos outside the world. At this moment, an inexplicable wave rippled out. This fluctuation seeped into Luo Fan's mind, seeped into his body and mind, causing him to vaguely understand something. It also seemed like he hadn't comprehended anything. This was the same state as before. Discover this. Luo Fan was inexplicably happy, but he also felt a little relieved. No matter what the seed of primal chaos was, this change was already a treasure that was worth him taking the risk of Emperor Ju and the others finding trouble with him. At this moment, Luo Fan no longer hesitated. He activated the seed of primal chaos again and again, allowing a portion of the primal chaos to be absorbed into the depths of its complex structure. Then, he sent it back through the same route. Through this process, the changes in the primal chaos caused by the seed of primal chaos produced an inexplicable wave, and the principles contained in the primal chaos were poured into his mind. This made him understand something. Although he couldn't specifically say what he had comprehended or what mysterious principles he had obtained, it was still a state where he could improve and comprehend at every moment. However, it was, after all, a state where he could improve and comprehend at every moment. For Luo Fan, it had an inexplicable attraction, making him feel that his body and mind were always in a fulfilling state. This state was constantly transmitted to him by his clone that was transforming inside the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. It allowed him to have all sorts of new understandings of the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. It was as if countless inspirations were colliding and brewing in his mind, and were about to evolve into some key principles and mysteries. In this way, time passed by slowly. Unknowingly, 1,000 years had passed. On this day, the entire world suddenly shook inexplicably. This vibration was born from the underworld and spread to every corner of the world. Even the space inside the palace that Luo Fan was in couldn't avoid the invasion of this vibration. This vibration produced all sorts of subtle changes. This vibration instantly made all the supreme emperors in this world vigilant. Even the world emperor returned from his state of cultivation at this moment. He had an inquisitive and nervous expression on his face. This is the further perfection of the world. The great calamity of the world is closer, he murmured. After all, the time that the world emperor had spent in this world had reached an unimaginable level. It was even possible that he had already been here when this world was born. Such an existence naturally had a grasp over all the changes in this world that surpassed all other supreme emperors. He also had his own understanding of the impending great calamity of the world. It was precisely because of this that he was able to sense the changes that even Luo Fan couldn't sense the moment the vibration appeared. He knew where the impact of this vibration was. Although Luo Fan's understanding of this world was not as great as the world emperor's, but after countless years of cultivation and the countless improvements that he couldn't understand, his perception had reached an unimaginable level. The moment he felt this tremor, he was only second to the World King. He had already sensed what the World King had sensed and knew the impact of this tremor. He actually transformed the underworld once again. It seems that his understanding of enlightenment is getting deeper and deeper. According to what I can sense now, the great calamity of the world should arrive in 68 million years. Compared to the 300 million years before, it has shortened by several times. Such thoughts flashed through his mind, and a faint smile appeared on his face. Although the time for the great calamity was shortened by several times, Luo Fan wasn't too worried. After all, the time of the great calamity's arrival represented the degree of perfection of this world. The faster the arrival time, the more perfect the world was. Naturally, the greater the resistance against the great calamity of the world. Wasn't this something to be happy about? At this moment, he stopped the process of using the seed of chaos to comprehend the mysteries of the state of chaos. He directly left the seed of chaos to his clone inside, the natural, inextinguishable spiritual light. He took a step forward and directly left the natural, inextinguishable spiritual light. He came to the outside world and quietly floated above the sacred mountain. Looking into the distance, he saw that the world was undergoing some kind of change. The endless great path fragments that were originally broken into countless parts and mixed with the mysteries of the true saints seemed to be stirred up by some kind of power at this moment. This kind of stirring was extremely terrifying. But compared to the endless great path fragments that existed in this world, it was still so insignificant. The impact on the countless great path fragments was still so small that it was not visible to the naked eye. If it wasn't for Luo Fan's sharp senses and shocking observation ability, he might not have discovered that the endless great path fragments were changing at this moment. Through his extremely sharp senses, Luo Fan could clearly feel that the great path fragments were moving at this moment. They weren't moving towards chaos, but towards order. It seemed that the great path fragments would eventually form an extremely vast and shocking great path. As for the endless mysteries of the true saint, although there was no obvious change in the process, there was a faint trend of change. The connection between the great path fragments and the great path fragments seemed to be getting closer and closer. In a trance, it made people wonder when they would completely fuse with the great path fragments. Looking at this scene, what appeared in Luo Fan's mind was the various changes that occurred in the underworld during the process of the evolution of the underworld. Looks like this world is really going to evolve into a truly perfect world. Luo Fan sighed in his heart. This kind of evolution would undoubtedly bring countless benefits to the world. It would make the world more stable and more powerful, allowing it to exist in the state of chaos for a longer time. However, at the same time, this kind of evolution would also cause the world to gradually lose its unique characteristics, causing the world to gradually become similar to the universe on Earth. What were those true saints thinking? They opened up such a perfect world, but why didn't they care about it? If they had put in more effort back then, the world would have become a truly perfect world. In that case, the great tribulation of heaven and earth that it encountered would also be a normal great tribulation of heaven and earth. It wouldn't be like this, where the great tribulation of heaven and earth was suppressed for too long, causing its power to increase by many times. It might even have the power of 5 or 6 great tribulations of heaven and earth in the first great tribulation of heaven and earth. Luo Fan suddenly cursed in his heart. He didn't care about the strength of these 5 or 6 great tribulations of heaven and earth. After all, even if it was 5 or 6 great tribulations of heaven and earth, he was confident that he could survive it. However, this was only the first tribulation of the heavens and earth. Now that the first great tribulation of heaven and earth was equivalent to 5 or 6 great tribulations of heaven and earth in a perfect world, what about the second and third great tribulation? What about the fourth great tribulation? What about the final 9th great tribulation? Even the 8th great tribulation of heaven and earth in the universe on earth was so terrifying that many true saints had to plan countless times to survive it. This great tribulation of heaven and earth was actually much stronger than the great tribulation of heaven and earth in a perfect world. It went without saying how small the possibility of surviving it was. He didn't believe that the true saints couldn't figure out what was going on if even he could guess it, since they'd already seen through this. Yet they didn't care about it no matter what. They were completely acting on their own, and they still created this world into such a state. How could he not doubt their intentions? All sorts of doubts surfaced in Luo Fan's mind. However, they soon disappeared without a trace. The intentions of the true saints were deep and unfathomable. How could he possibly figure it out? No matter how much he thought about it, it wouldn't help the truth at all. With a sigh, Luo Fan created a clone with a thought. He then stepped into the underworld. His main body returned to the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light and reappeared in front of the seed of chaos to continue the process that had lasted for 1,000 years. After 1,000 years of this kind of cultivation, he now faintly felt that his worldview had improved a little compared to the past. This improvement wasn't to make it more perfect, but to make it smoother. This smoothness was a kind of conflict with other worldviews. In the past, if he wanted to incorporate existences with different worldviews into his worldview, the conflict would be extremely tragic. He would almost have to completely destroy that existence and rebuild it according to the rules of his worldview. But now, he felt that this conflict was no longer so tragic. It seemed that after some subtle transformation, he could already incorporate it into his worldview. It was smoothness, although this smoothness didn't directly make Luo Fan feel that his worldview had become stronger. However, it made him realize that the adaptability of his worldview had been strengthened. A truly perfect worldview would definitely be able to explain everything. Not only did this include objective things, but it also included illusory concepts. For example, certain concepts that had developed from other worldviews. For example, the heavy concept that surpassed even the spiritual light that was being emitted from the seed of chaos was like this. In the past, Luo Fan's worldview was extremely powerless in the face of this concept. He might be able to construct a concept with the same effect, or he might be able to make that concept extremely similar to this concept, but that wasn't really absorbing this concept, nor was his worldview really accommodating this concept. However, things were different now. Currently, he was already able to accommodate it through some transformations. Even though this transformation was not simple and might even be rather complicated, it was still possible to accommodate it. Even if it was a little complicated, it was still accommodating. There was already an essential difference between being unable to accommodate it and not being able to accommodate it. This harvest made Luo Fan truly recognize the value of his 1,000 years of cultivation. At this moment, although he wanted to explore the specific changes and laws of this world, he wasn't willing to let go of such an opportunity. Of course, Luo Fan didn't just stand there in a daze, feeling the various fluctuations that were stimulated from the state of chaos pouring into his heart with all kinds of principles and mysteries. During this process, he was still cultivating to integrate the worldview of laws into his body. This kind of integration was extremely difficult. Compared to 1,000 years ago, although he had made some progress, it was still not enough to perfectly integrate his worldview of laws with his body. He could not achieve a state where his body and mind could completely become one with the worldview of laws. Luo Fan had already expected this kind of difficulty, but he wasn't in a hurry at this time. He was still carrying out this process unhurriedly. Compared to his main body, his clone inside the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light didn't seem to be very free. At this moment, he had gradually recovered from the process of breaking through. In other words, his body of flesh and blood had gradually turned into a true Six Worlds false sage. After becoming a Six Worlds false sage, he felt that his control over the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light had truly been fixed. It was fixed at a level that was inferior to his control over his own magic treasures, but much stronger than ordinary weapons. On this day, Luo Fan's clone let out a long breath, and the light and shadow inside the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light were reflected in his eyes again. Immediately after, he saw Emperor Ming and the others who had built a powerful defensive array around his main body. With a thought, he casually slapped the array with his palm. A mysterious force instantly blasted the array, causing it to suddenly shake violently. The tremors directly affected Emperor Ming and the other 8 Supreme Emperors, causing them to suddenly feel that their connection with the formation had suddenly been severed. Immediately after, the pressure that had been exerting on them for the past 1,000 years suddenly relaxed. At this moment, they knew what was going on. Each of them had a relaxed expression on their faces. With a flash, they came in front of Luo Fan's clone, bowed to him, and thanked him. Luo Fan naturally couldn't be bothered to talk to them. With a slight wave of his hand, he let them leave on their own. As for these supreme emperors who had been refined by the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, he didn't treat them as his own kind. This kind of existence had already lost their own consciousness. At most, they could only be regarded as a relatively special puppet. Naturally, he couldn't treat them from the perspective of the past. In the eyes of Emperor Ming and the other supreme emperors who had been refined by the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, the current Luo Fan was already different from the past. If in the past the Luo Fan in their eyes was slightly different from the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, then at this moment, in their eyes, Luo Fan had completely become the embodiment of the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light and had truly become their master. Under such circumstances, they naturally didn't dare to talk nonsense with Luo Fan. When they saw Luo Fan waving his hand to let them leave, they thanked Luo Fan again and returned to their original cultivation worlds. Seeing that they had left, Luo Fan then turned to look at where his main body was. At this moment, around his main body was the formation that Emperor Ming and the others had constructed back then. At this moment, he had already fixed it in a place of nothingness, forming an existence similar to a world. After this change, not only did the formation's ability to resist the concept of heaviness from the seed of chaos not weaken, but had also strengthened a lot. At this moment, in the many nearby worlds, they were no longer affected by the concept of heaviness, and there was no difference from before when they operated. After 1,000 years of adjustment, at this moment, the endless worlds within the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light had all recovered to the chaos caused by the collision with the state of chaos. All the worlds had completely recovered to their original positions. The connection with the other worlds had also been completely restored. The distribution of the levels of the worlds hadn't changed much. Luo Fan's doppelganger had already entered a level 7 world after just a little bit of distinguishing. The moment he entered this world, he had a feeling that he had already established an extremely close connection with this world. In a trance, he seemed to be able to mobilize the most powerful force in this world with a single breath. Vaguely, he seemed to be able to sense the endless mysteries of this world. The mysteries that belonged to this world were constantly pouring into his mind. After sensing this indescribable feeling, he casually cut off the mysteries that were constantly pouring into his mind. These mysteries were the mysteries of this world. Although these mysteries also belonged to the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, in terms of their roots, they were no different from the mysteries that were naturally poured into Luo Fan's mind after each breakthrough. However, these mysteries had, after all, been distorted and changed by this world. However, they had already been bestowed with even more significance, and they had been bestowed with even more changes. This made it extremely difficult for Luo Fan to return to its origin and restore the most basic and most fundamental concept. It was even impossible. Under such circumstances, the more mysteries he absorbed, the more he would be affected. At that time, the fundamental mysteries of the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light that he had obtained after his breakthrough might be affected and become distorted. Luo Fan couldn't be more clear about this outcome. How could he possibly make such a mistake? After cutting off the mysteries that were continuously pouring into his body, with a thought, a ball of golden light slowly appeared in his body. This was the cultivation method of Luo Fan's fleshly body. Chapter 17:22. This cultivation method itself was born from the fundamental rules of the connate, inextinguishable spirit light. For it, all the mysteries of the world and the connate, inextinguishable spirit light were no different, but they could all become resources for its growth, allowing it to finally undergo a transformation. Therefore, for Luo Fan, the distorted mysteries in this world didn't have much benefit for Luo Fan. But for this cultivation method, it was the best food. It was a pity that this level 7 world was still much higher than this cultivation method. At this moment, the endless mysteries in the surroundings surged into the cultivation technique, but only a small portion of it was absorbed by the cultivation technique. Most of the remaining disappeared through some mysterious method and turned into nothingness. During the process of it disappearing, many of the mysteries that the cultivation method could comprehend also disappeared without a trace. In such a situation, this cultivation method continued to absorb the endless mysteries here, so the efficiency was naturally extremely low. At the very least, it didn't reach the level that Luo Fan wanted. Luo Fan had already expected this situation. But at this moment, he didn't hesitate. With a thought, he raised his hand and made a grabbing motion. Above the primordial origin spirit treasure floating above his head, a projection brazenly broke through the layers of barriers, crossed the air, and slammed into the cultivation method in front of him, wrapping the cultivation method in it. As it wrapped up the cultivation method, the mysteries that kept pouring into this cultivation method were naturally blocked. After that, Luo Fan didn't hesitate to press the projection of the primordial origin spiritual treasure directly into the world. Luo Fan was already experienced in this kind of thing. At this time, he naturally didn't hesitate at all. He directly wrapped the projection of the primordial origin spiritual treasure with the cultivation method and pressed it into the great Tao. It directly sank into the long river of the connate, inextinguishable spirit light inside the great Tao and integrated into a level 5 world. At this moment, endless mysteries poured into the cultivation method from the level 5 world, turning into nourishment for the cultivation method's growth. As the mysteries poured into the cultivation method continued to undergo some sort of transformation before it started accumulating. Seeing this scene, Luo Fan let out a long breath. Under such circumstances, this meant that his body of flesh and blood had stepped into a higher world. In other words, it was only a matter of time before he reached the 7 worlds false sage level. As long as this cultivation method underwent a true transformation and broke through to a higher level, he would naturally be able to follow the guidance of this cultivation method and naturally break through to become a 7-world false sage. However, as he heaved a sigh of relief, a look of helplessness appeared on his face, because at this moment, he felt that the emptiness of the cultivation method had reached a state that he had never imagined. Although the absorption speed of the endless mysteries was extremely fast, and the absorption strength was also unbelievably strong, it was still inconceivable. However, during the entire process. This cultivation method didn't seem to have changed at all. The extent of the enhancement, the extent of the transformation was so small that he couldn't feel it at all. This situation clearly meant that for this cultivation method to undergo its final transformation, it would take countless times longer than he had imagined. That was the only way. That was why such a situation could have happened just now. However, it's normal. After all, I'm already a 7-world false sage. I can already control the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light to such a degree. It's hard to imagine how much stronger my control will be after I break through to the 7-world false sage level. How can it be so easy to achieve? Luo Fan quickly convinced himself. Sighing in his heart, he raised his eyes and looked in a certain direction. This direction couldn't be described as north, south, east, and west. It was an even more subtle and mysterious direction, a direction that transcended time and space. That was the direction of the core of the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light. After setting his goal in that direction, he thought for a moment and took a step forward. His figure instantly traversed in endless distance, passed through endless space-time, and arrived in an extremely mysterious place. In this place, everything was so mysterious, so unbelievable, and so difficult to understand. Originally, in the outside world, the connate, inextinguishable essence required the joint efforts of the endless worlds to condense. However, in this place, it was endless. It was like an ocean, but also like the universe, filling the surroundings. Endless principles that Luo Fan couldn't understand or even imagine filled the endless connate, inextinguishable essence. They interacted in ways that Luo Fan couldn't imagine, and in the process, they produced all kinds of incredible power. Luo Fan stood there quietly with an inexplicable expression on his face. His heart was filled with the desire to explore the boundless universe in front of him. Unfortunately, this was the core of the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light. It was like the great Tao of the perfect world. Although everyone knew that it contained supreme mysteries and all kinds of unbelievable principles, no one could fully comprehend it. However, no one was able to completely comprehend it. Even if someone was able to gain a little bit from it, they would have already transcended and become a true sage. Therefore, at this time, although he had such a strong desire, he was still like a duck listening to thunder. He couldn't understand the mysteries of the universe in front of him at all. Even though his physical body had become the six worlds' false sage within the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light, and he had obtained an endless amount of the mysteries within the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light, it was not enough for him to understand the endless universe in front of him. If it wasn't for the fact that he was extremely sure, he might have thought that the comprehension he gained from breaking through to the next realm was aimed at another place and another kind of existence. I'm still too far from it after all. Sighing to himself, Luo Fan stepped into the universe in front of him. In that instant, it was as if his body had been thrown into countless worlds and reincarnated again and again. One life after another, one death after another, one breakthrough after another, one destruction after another, and one creation after another flowed through his heart continuously. It was only a few breaths of time in the outside world, but he seemed to have already experienced billions of trillions of years. It was as if he had already experienced billions of trillions of lives. If an ordinary cultivator were to encounter such an encounter, even a level 3 monarch would definitely not be able to escape the fate of being challenged and confused. If one's mind was a little weaker, they might even completely lose themselves and be replaced by a certain life in a certain reincarnation. In the end, they would completely transform into another person. However, obviously, Luo Fan wasn't any other cultivator. He had already completely fused his worldview of the laws with his soul, turning into an existence that had a 1-2 relationship. To him, no matter how many reincarnations he had gone through, no matter how many lives he had experienced, no matter how exciting and interesting those reincarnations were, the worldview of the laws that existed in his heart tightly guarded his self, allowing all challenges to collide with his soul. However, it didn't cause any changes to his soul, let alone any confusing changes to his self. The impact of these changes was that his soul was engraved with traces. All his past understandings were taken out again and again, chewed and refined again in this process. It formed a deeper level of integration with the worldview of the laws. And this was obviously a change that had great benefits for him. His aura became more and more restrained and mellow as a result. This was the change in the external environment caused by the flow of aura. As a result, it was suppressed less and less. During this change, the degree of integration between his worldview of the laws and his body was faster and deeper than when his main body was sitting cross-legged on the throne. Of course, this was only according to the time in the outside world. If it was according to the time that Luo Fan Soul had experienced, then time would have naturally slowed down by countless times. While this clone and main body were immersed in the process of cultivation, in the underworld, Luo Fan's other clone had already arrived at the Black Sun. At this moment, the sun was completely different from before. The buildings from before had already been divided into stars, decorating the interior of the Black Sun like a universe. Each of these stars had a world on their surface, and the internal structure of the world was more complex and mysterious than the previous structure of Yama, Magistrate, Oxhead, and Horseface. Now, on the surface of each planet, a brand new civilization had developed. Those civilizations were all strange and had their own characteristics. Unlike before, they no longer used the method of judgment to determine the whereabouts of the countless souls and spirits. Instead, they used a silent method to allow the souls and spirits to return to their respective places through the natural state of survival and the operation of the internal rules of the civilization. They either went to other stars, other worlds, directly entered the underworld, or directly returned to the Yang realm through some mysterious method. Due to this change, the cries and screams that had filled the interior of the Black Sun, the endless resentment, the ferocious auras, and so on had all disappeared. Instead, there was only an inexplicable sense of peace. It felt as if they had returned to normal space-time and returned to the normal universe. In the center of the countless stars, there was a huge star, On it, Luo Fan could see that Gui Shou was sitting cross-legged in the center of the star, carefully sensing the operation of the entire underworld. He carefully sensed all kinds of irregularities in the process of the entire underworld's operation, or all kinds of possible loopholes. He had already carried out Luo Fan's guidance to the end. Even though he had made such changes to the underworld and had even affected the space-time change of the Yang realm, he was still not satisfied with the underworld. He was still looking for room to improve the underworld and was still thinking about how to make the underworld further. At this moment, he sensed Luo Fan's arrival. He opened his eyes, and his pupils directly reflected Luo Fan's figure. After seeing Luo Fan, Gui Shou showed a look of respect. He immediately got up, took a step, and directly arrived in front of Luo Fan. He bowed to Luo Fan. "You've done a good job. The transformation of the underworld into this state has countless benefits for the perfection of the world. The Yang realm has now begun to transform because of your actions," Luo Fan praised with a smile. "It turns out to be true. When I finished transforming the space-time, I had an inexplicable feeling. It was as if my cultivation speed had increased a lot. It was as if the Yang realm had taken a liking to me, allowing me to sense the Yang realm more clearly than before." Gui Shou listened. Gui Shou heard this and said with a sudden realization. Luo Fan smiled slightly. He was not surprised that Gui Shou could sense it. This world was extremely mysterious. Although some places were extremely imperfect, some places had extremely strict and complete rules. For example, the sense of people or things that were a threat to this world, or the sense of people or things that were meritorious to this world. They were all unimaginably accurate. This had already attracted the attention of this world when Gui Shou and the others created the creatures that looked like born Taoism aptitudes. In the end, they had a competition under the control of this world, which showed how strict the rules of this world were. Under such rules, Gui Shou's actions had actually directly caused such a change in this world, causing the Yang realm to begin a new round of evolution. How could such rules not be touched? How could Gui Shou not benefit from it? Even if this world was perfected, it would cause the great calamity of this world to come faster and faster, but could not change the various merits of this world becoming perfect. Your senses are not wrong. Now, you are qualified to involve in the fundamental transformation of the Yang realm. Next, you can no longer limit your vision to the underworld," Luo Fan said lightly. Hearing this, Gui Shou's heart trembled, and his face was filled with disbelief. He said, "Master, I don't understand what you mean." Luo Fan only smiled and said, "Do you really not understand?" Gui Shou could not help but feel a little embarrassed. If he said that he did not understand at all, then he was obviously lying with his eyes wide open. After all, he had some feelings about what Luo Fan said, and he had already sensed the changes that were happening in the Yang realm. How could he not know that the changes were related to him? He asked this before because he felt it was a little unbelievable, and he was a little confused about how to participate in it and how not to limit his vision to the underworld. This world is about to have a great calamity of this world. Luo Fan did not get entangled in the matter of Gui Shou pretending to be stupid. Instead, he directly said another word that shocked Gui Shou's complexion. "Great calamity of this world," Gui Shou exclaimed. "But the tribulation of this heaven and earth, the tribulation that can transform this heaven and earth and make it grow, can also destroy this heaven and earth and make it disappear in the end? It seems that you have also sensed this." Luo Fan smiled and nodded. Gui Shou got Luo Fan's confirmation, but at this time, it was impossible for him to be as calm as Luo Fan. At this moment, his face changed between green and white, and his breath also produced various kinds of chaotic fluctuations. Even a fool could see how chaotic his mood was. "What should I do? What should I do?" he murmured. Luo Fan frowned and said, "Wake up." Although the voice was not loud, it was like a big bell, directly shaking Gui Shou's heart and instantly awakening him from the chaotic thoughts. After coming back to his senses, Gui Shou still looked a little frightened and bowed to Luo Fan, begging, "Master, please give me some advice." Hearing this, Luo Fan was even more dissatisfied and said, "Although this is a challenge, it is also an opportunity." "What do you mean by acting like this? Don't you have any expectations for this world to pass the great calamity? If so, what's the use of this world's favor for you?" These words, like a chisel, pierced into the depths of Gue Shou's heart. In an instant, the panic in his heart was dispelled, and Gue Shou's eyes became clear. "Master, you are right. It is your servant's fault." Gue Shou blushed and said to Luo Fan. Hearing this, Luo Fan nodded and said, "You can still be saved if you know you are wrong. Next, what you need to do is to improve this world as much as possible. Try to make this world more resistant to the great calamity of the world. Otherwise, when the great calamity of the world comes, the first one to be injured will be you." Gue Shou nodded and said, "Your servant understands." Just at this moment, a voice came into the ears of Luo Fan and Gue Shou. "The great calamity of the world is about to come? Fellow Taoist, are you trying to scare me?" This was a woman's voice. Hearing this voice, Luo Fan's heart moved, and he knew who the owner of this voice was. This was a level 3 emperor that Luo Fan had seen before, the Sovereign Realm. This Sovereign Realm did not speak much when Luo Fan met her before. However, his strength was definitely not ordinary. The Xiantian, inextinguishable spiritual light that he emitted was eternal and indestructible. Among all the third-grade martial monarchs, he could be considered an existence that belonged to the upper echelon. "Since you are already here, why don't you show yourself?" Luo Fan said faintly. "This is my impoliteness," the Sovereign Realm said softly. As he spoke, time and space twisted, and the figure of a woman had already appeared in front of Luo Fan. This woman's face was delicate and lovely, but there was a strong heroic spirit between her eyebrows. Her entire body emitted the inextinguishable aura of the inextinguishable divine light. It filled the surroundings, and the surrounding time and space seemed to be slightly distorted. Luo Fan slightly frowned. With a thought, the inextinguishable aura of the inextinguishable divine light also gushed out of his body. In an instant, it had already suppressed the inextinguishable aura of the inextinguishable divine light. The Sovereign Realm refined a strand of the inextinguishable divine light. To be able to borrow the aura of the inextinguishable divine light, Luo Fan was not bad either. After his clone became a 7 worlds false sage, the degree of integration with the inextinguishable divine light became higher, and the inextinguishable aura of the inextinguishable divine light could naturally be transferred to his body. I didn't expect Taoist Luo Huang to have such a huge improvement compared to the last time. The Sovereign Realm restrained his aura and praised. In just a few thousand years, you can completely change your appearance. However, it makes me feel like I have never felt before that I am already old. You flatter me. It's just a coincidence. Luo Fan only smiled. It's not an exaggeration to say that. There is a public opinion on this. However, I want to love you, but this is not the time to talk about this. Taoist Luo Huang, let's talk about the great tribulation of heaven and earth. The Sovereign Realm raised his eyebrows and said, "The great tribulation of heaven and earth is about to descend. There should be no doubt about this," Luo Fan said calmly. There was no room for negotiation in his words, and he directly confirmed what he had said previously. Such a performance made the Sovereign Realm frown and say, "There has never been such a thing as a great tribulation of heaven and earth in this world. How can you be so sure?" Luo Fan said calmly, "As for how to be sure, as long as you let go of your prejudices and sense it carefully, you will naturally know. For an existence at the level of a third-grade emperor, no matter how extravagant the explanation was, as long as the other party was determined, it would not be able to change the other party's mind. Therefore, the best way was, of course, to let the other party sense it herself and discover it herself. Only then would it be possible for the other party to change their perception and their own thoughts. And for an existence at the level of a third-grade emperor, their perception had already reached an incomparably shocking level. Normally speaking, Such a perception would be so obvious that the great tribulation of heaven and earth would arrive tens of millions of years later, but she should have sensed it. There was only one reason why she did not sense it now, and that was because her own perception had blocked her perception. Therefore, as long as they let go of the prejudices in their hearts and let go of this fixed perception, they would naturally be able to sense the arrival of the great tribulation of heaven and earth. Hearing Luo Fan's words, the sovereign realm frowned and said, "We cultivators will always sense countless information and receive countless premonitions. Among them, there is not even one in a trillion that can be truly established. Completely letting go of the perception in one's heart would naturally be able to receive a premonition of the great tribulation of heaven and earth." What's so strange about that? If it's just this reason alone, you still won't be able to convince me. Chapter 17:23. A cultivator's sensing ability would increase along with their cultivation realm. Top percent, dot percent, small percent say. Even ordinary cultivators who had yet to become immortals could faintly sense the future and all sorts of things that would happen in the future. For cultivators who had almost reached the peak of the true divine stage, like the Supreme Emperor, of course, the things they could sense would only be countless times more. It was impossible for it to be any less than that. However, all this while, why had not many Supreme Emperors used this sensing ability as the basis for their actions? Not a single Supreme Emperor would make a divination beforehand, and then set up some kind of scheme based on the results of the divination. Apart from the fact that those who had reached the level of a Supreme Emperor usually had opponents who were also at the level of Supreme Emperor. As a result, their calculation abilities would be interfered with, and it would be difficult for them to obtain the complete information they needed. More importantly, as Sovereign Hua had said, their sensing abilities could sense countless information at all times and obtain countless premonitions. And among these information and predictions, almost all of them were fake. Only one in a trillion pieces of information might have some relation to the truth. In other words, if they used the information they sensed and the predictions they received as a guideline for their actions, every action they took would only have a 1 in a trillion chance of success. If they wanted to increase this chance of success, what they could do was to use their own minds to predict with all their might and search for a very ordinary, correct future from the billions of pieces of information they received. And this was obviously not as correct as directly acting according to their own nature and experiences. It was beneficial. Because of this, generally speaking, Supreme Emperors and even existences of lower levels would not use this kind of prediction of the future as a guideline for their actions. Therefore, at this moment, only the Transcendent Emperor would say such words. In fact, Luo Fan had his own understanding of the situation. Normally speaking, the countless pieces of information sensed by powerful cultivators, countless predictions, and even all kinds of completely opposite, all kinds of joy, and all kinds of predictions that absolutely conflicted with each other. In fact, they were all real. It was just that those were countless different futures. In other words, the endless information and predictions represented a completely different future. The reason why it appeared chaotic, the reason why there were conflicts, that was because different futures would lead to different developments, and these different developments would be mixed together. It was just an extremely chaotic state of information. It was precisely because of this that they were able to find the 1 in a trillion truth amidst the countless pieces of information. That was why they were able to use the 1 in a trillion possibility to guide them to make the correct decision. As for why existences at the level of Supreme Emperors were able to receive countless predictions of the future, thus allowing the countless futures to mix together. This made it difficult for them to tell the difference. But the cultivators who had yet to become immortals were able to obtain accurate predictions and see an accurate future. The reason was actually very simple. Because the more powerful a cultivator was, the more powerful he was, the greater the impact on the world. Those cultivators who had yet to appear had little influence on the world. The future they saw was simply the future determined by those powerful existences. The development was completely determined by those powerful existences. Therefore, what they saw just now was more likely to be true. On the other hand, it was different for those powerful cultivators. Their influence on the world was simply too great. Almost any thought, or any thought could turn the world upside down. It could cause all sorts of unimaginable changes in the countless space-time. Under such circumstances, it could be said that they were constantly at the intersection of countless futures. They could step into a completely different future at any time. Under such circumstances, what they saw and sensed was naturally the countless pieces of information from the future. Of course, this difference did not mean that the weaker cultivators were able to predict the future better, while the stronger cultivators' abilities had regressed. In fact, the difference between the two still remained the same. The strong were still powerful, and the weak were still weak. For those weaker cultivators, even if they could see the future, even if they could recognize the future, it would be of no help to them. That was because no matter how clear they were, even if they could see even the tiniest details, even if they could see all the developments, they already knew that the tiniest action could change the future, and it could lead the future to a completely different path. However, with their strength, they could only watch no matter how hard they tried, no matter how much they wanted to change the world. It was impossible. In other words, even if those weaker cultivators could see the future, it would only be a kind of sorrow. Even if they could see it, it would be meaningless. As for those powerful cultivators, such as the Supreme Emperor, it was different. Although what they saw was completely chaotic and countless pieces of information interweaved from the future, they would not be affected at all. For them, no matter what they saw, as long as they were unwilling, they could directly change it. No matter how sorrowful the future was, it was the same. At this moment, when the sovereign heard Luo Fan's words, a puzzled expression appeared on his face. At this moment, a faint sense of foreboding arose in her heart. Luo Fan was a level 3 emperor, an existence on the same level as her. She was very clear about this. Obviously, such an existence would not speak carelessly. Since he said so, it was very likely that if she let go of the restrictions, what she would see would be what she did not want to see. All kinds of thoughts flashed through her mind, but in the end, the sovereign suppressed this ominous feeling and slowly adjusted her mind. She adjusted her perception. During this adjustment, all kinds of feelings that were originally suppressed by her perception began to quickly emerge in her heart. How was this possible? The moment she saw this information, her expression changed greatly. Because at this moment, the future that she saw, she could not believe it. The information that she saw was not as messy as before, nor was it completely mixed together like before. Instead, everything pointed to one goal, and that was the arrival of the great calamity of the world. This situation, there was only one possibility, and that was this fate could not be changed at all. No matter what kind of future was chosen, the great calamity of the world was bound to come, and it would come in just a few tens of millions of years. Looks like you should have seen it clearly. At this moment, Luo Fan smiled slightly. Said, the great calamity of the world was a great calamity of the world. Involved time, space, and everything else. No matter what kind of future, no matter what direction of development was chosen, as long as the world met the requirements, the great calamity of the world would definitely come. Because of this, what the Supreme Emperor received, the countless joy and endless omens that pointed to the countless futures naturally pointed to the final outcome, the outcome of the great calamity of the world. It is indeed the great calamity of the world. I did not expect this world to actually face the great calamity of the world. The sovereign smiled bitterly. Hearing this, Luo Fan's heart skipped a beat. The world was also going to face the great calamity of the world. It seemed that the sovereign should have also encountered the great calamity of the world in another world. In this case, the sovereign should have entered this world from the Earth's universe. After all, this world was adjacent to the Earth's universe. An existence that was not a true sage could not cross two perfect worlds. So obviously, he could only enter this world from the Earth's universe. May I know which true sage disciple you are? Luo Fan asked tentatively. Hearing this, the sovereign was slightly shocked, and a hint of doubt appeared in his eyes. Then, he suddenly understood why Luo Fan asked this question. Therefore, he just shook his head and said, "I'm not a disciple of any true sage." Back then, sect leader Tong Tian and I were cultivators of the same generation. But in the end, when we fought for the opportunity to become a sage, he won, and I lost. Opportunity to become a sage? Luo Fan frowned. This thing, it sounded like it was not simple. You will know these things in the future, but right now, there is no way to explain it in words. The sovereign sighed, but his eyes were a little dazed, as if he was recalling all kinds of experiences in the past billions of years. Hearing this, Luo Fan could not help but be more curious about the opportunity to become a sage. However, at this time, the relationship between him and the sovereign was not too deep, and the sovereign did not seem to be willing to tell him the reason. If he continued to ask, he would only be asking for a snub. Therefore, he kept his mouth shut and said with a smile, "I didn't expect you to have such a history. It's really admirable. Since you have experience in the great tribulation of heaven and earth, maybe this time the great tribulation of heaven and earth will depend on you." Hearing this, the sovereign came back to his senses and said, "Although I have seen the great tribulation of heaven and earth, I don't have much experience. The one who has the real experience is fellow Taoist world. Fellow Taoist world already knows about this, so you must have some arrangements." Luo Fan was not surprised that the sovereign knew that the sovereign was more experienced than her. Judging from the appearance of the realm emperor, he was not an absolutely low-key person. Since he knew about things that Yi Futian had just entered this world not long ago, the realm emperor, who had been in this world for billions of years, obviously knew more than Yi Futian, not less. Since the great tribulation of heaven and earth is coming, I also need to go back and make some preparations. I will take my leave now. The sovereign bowed to Luo Fan and said. Hearing this, Luo Fan smiled and returned the bow to send her off. The conversation between the two of them was not concealed at all. At this moment, there should be countless powerful existences in this world that sense the content of their conversation. In an instant, a powerful aura emerged from all over the world. Every single one of those auras was so terrifying and powerful. When they appeared, they filled the heavens and earth, causing the entire region to instantly fall into a battlefield. Among these auras, there were thoughts communicating with each other. They were communicating with each other. Among them, there were even thoughts that were directed towards Luo Fan. These thoughts were none other than asking about the great tribulation of heaven and earth. Luo Fan didn't answer their questions at all. After hearing their doubts, Luo Fan didn't answer them at all. After hearing their doubts, he casually sent them to ask the sovereign, saying that he did not know much and that the one who truly grasped everything was the sovereign. He only knew about it after the sovereign reminded him. These words obviously did not satisfy those powerful existences. However, no matter how powerful they were, to Luo Fan, they were only on par with him at most. What Luo Fan was not willing to say. How could they force him to say it? In particular, after a few supreme sovereigns were entangled by Luo Fan, they were taught a lesson by Luo Fan, causing their bodies to explode a few times. After that, no other supreme sovereigns came to bother Luo Fan. Fellow Taoist, you're really resourceful. At this moment, the sovereign's somewhat helpless voice rang in Luo Fan's ears. Luo Fan just smiled and said, Fellow Taoist, you're the one who's resourceful. These things should have been done by you. But now, you're pushing it to me and want me to do it. What do you mean, it should have been done by me? The sovereign said indignantly at this moment. Fellow Taoist and I are both part of this world. Even if I stay a little longer in this world, there's no difference between me and fellow Taoists. What's the difference between my responsibilities and yours? The sovereign said helplessly. Hearing this, Luo Fan just sneered and said, There's no difference? Why didn't fellow Taoist reveal it earlier? Why did you wait so many years before letting me reveal it? Or, fellow Taoist already has the confidence to pass through the great tribulation of heaven and earth, so there's no need for other Taoists? At this point, he paused and then acted as if he had a sudden realization and said, Oh, it seems that I've guessed the truth. Sorry. It seems that I was being a busybody this time. Hearing Luo Fan's deliberate act, the sovereign smiled even more bitterly. He did indeed have some plans. This was a matter of course. However, Luo Fan occupied an extremely important position in these plans, and all the other emperors also needed to contribute a great deal of effort. The reason why he didn't say earlier was because he was still perfecting his plans. Now that Luo Fan said it like this, he seemed a little petty. He immediately said, I didn't tell the other Taoists because it's an offense to let others know about this. I only hoped that the other Taoists could sense it themselves. How? Is this preparation? Hearing this, Luo Fan couldn't help but smile and said, Is that so? Then it seems that I've really messed up fellow Taoist plans. What a sin. Can fellow Taoists spare me? The sovereign smiled bitterly. Luo Fan faintly smiled and finally stopped talking. Seeing that Luo Fan didn't speak anymore, the sovereign heaved a sigh of relief and said, Since fellow Taoist has spoken, then this time, we won't delay any further. Why don't we have a meeting to discuss how to deal with this calamity? Although there were still tens of millions of years before the calamity would descend, for existences like them, tens of millions of years was nothing. A cultivation session and a seclusion session would be over. It was precisely because of this that it was time to discuss how to survive the great tribulation of the world. As he spoke, the World King sighed again and said, Originally, there were still hundreds of millions of years before, so it would have been fine to plan slowly. I didn't think that fellow Taoist actions would suddenly speed up the great tribulation of the heavens and earth by 10 times, leaving only tens of millions of years. For existences like the sovereign, everything that Gui Shou did was everything that Luo Fan did. The result of anything that Gui Shou did was the result of Luo Fan's actions. Hearing this, Luo Fan didn't care and said, Although it's 10 times faster, fellow Taoist has to admit that the current endurance of the world is 10 times stronger than before. Hearing this, the sovereign was speechless. This was the truth. Although the calamity of the world was faster, the world had become more complete. The formation of the great Tao fragments and the mysteries of the true divine had become more orderly than before. The stability of the world had increased by more than 10 times. From this aspect, it was obviously a good thing for the world. Even so, it's still a bit rushed. The sovereign sighed. After a while, the sovereign suddenly said, All right, I've already informed the other Taoists. Now is the time for the meeting. Obviously, when he was talking with Luo Fan, the sovereign had already taken action and informed the other supreme sovereigns one by one. This was not strange at all. Even some intelligent mortals could do multitasking. Supreme sovereigns like them could even evolve countless worlds at the same time without any pressure. It couldn't be any easier to inform the others while talking. Hearing this, Luo Fan nodded. With a thought, he took Gui Shou and followed the sovereign's guidance. With a step, his figure had already arrived at a mysterious place. It was a vast expanse of dusk, and in the midst of this dusk, there was no end to it. In this dusky place, there were all kinds of mysteries that could not be described with words surging. Is this Taoist friend's connate inextinguishable spiritual light? Using this connate inextinguishable spiritual light as the venue, Taoist friend is really good. Luo Fan knew what it was at first glance and couldn't help but praise. At this time, the sovereign's figure appeared in front of him and said, Isn't it because it's too rushed? Otherwise, I could find a more suitable venue. The connate inextinguishable spiritual light was not like other treasures. The principles and mysteries contained in it were what the supreme sovereigns needed the most. In the eyes of the supreme sovereigns, it was even what they relied on to become true divines. Under such circumstances, publicizing the connate inextinguishable spiritual light. For any rank 3 emperor, it was the same as opening up their own treasury to the public. This wasn't something an expert with a normal mentality could do. Hearing the sovereign's words, Luo Fan just smiled. At this time, Qing Yi and Yu Ji, who were a little confused, also arrived at the same time. Obviously, They had also received the news from the sovereign and rushed here at the same time. After all, they were already supreme sovereigns. Although they were not as good as Luo Fan and Gue Shou, they were already standing at the peak of this world. However, they were already standing at the pinnacle of this world, so they naturally had to participate in this matter that concerned the survival of this world. When the two of them saw Luo Fan and the sovereign, they couldn't help but bow. Then, they cautiously came behind Luo Fan. After becoming supreme sovereigns, they more clearly felt the gap between them and Luo Fan and the sovereign. That cautiousness came from the bottom of their hearts. The sovereign naturally didn't pay too much attention to Qing, Yi, and Yuji. He just nodded slightly and continued to talk with Luo Fan. While they were talking, more and more supreme sovereigns stepped into the Khanate inextinguishable spiritual light and gradually appeared around them. These experts behaved differently after entering the Khanate inextinguishable spiritual light. For those level 3 sovereigns who also had the Khanate inextinguishable spiritual light, this simulated chaotic state wasn't much of an obstacle for them. The aura of the Khanate inextinguishable spiritual light was enough for them to do whatever they wanted in this simulated chaotic state, just like in other normal space-time. However, those sovereigns who didn't have the Khanate inextinguishable spiritual light were obviously different. For them, this simulated chaotic state was almost like a real chaotic state. They had to attach themselves to those level 3 sovereigns to settle down with the aura of those level 3 sovereigns. In this way, as more and more monarchs appeared here, the dusky existences were divided into 23 camps. Among them, Luo Fan was included, but not the sovereign. 24 Khanate inextinguishable spiritual light. Luo Fan glanced over and couldn't help but feel inexplicably shocked. Each camp represented one Khanate inextinguishable spiritual light. 23 camps represented 23 Khanate inextinguishable spiritual lights. In addition to the inextinguishable spiritual light that belonged to the sovereign, there were obviously 24 Khanate inextinguishable spiritual lights. An imperfect world actually contained so many Khanate inextinguishable spiritual lights. It was unbelievable no matter how one looked at it. Chapter 17:24. Judging from the World King's words, it was clear that there were still level 3 emperors who had yet to arrive. Hearing this, Luo Fan was even more shocked, but there was no longer any doubt on his face. N is an element of top, N is an element of point, N is an element of small, N is an element of say. There was no longer any doubt on his face. 24 Khanate inextinguishable spiritual lights were already extremely shocking. Even if there were a few more, it wouldn't be a big deal. At this moment, at a glance, there were nearly 300 supreme emperors within this Khanate inextinguishable spiritual light. Among them, there were more than 3 or 4 supreme emperors around each level 3 emperor. The one with the most martial emperors was the world emperor. There were nearly 50 supreme martial emperors by his side. Most of these supreme emperors were acquaintances of Luo Fan, but there were also some that Luo Fan had never seen before. Looking at the many supreme emperors in front of him, Luo Fan sighed inwardly. When he first entered this world and found out that there were existences at the level of supreme emperors in this world, he thought that there were only a few dozen supreme emperors. He didn't expect that there were already nearly 300 of them. Moreover, it seemed that this wasn't all of the supreme emperors in this world. This made him recall his thoughts in the past, and his heart became somewhat complicated. At this moment, the World King had already spoken. This time, I've invited all of you here. I believe that all of you have already received the news. That's right, this time, we're discussing how to survive the first calamity of this world. His words were directly transmitted into the ears of the nearly 300 supreme emperors present. At this moment, the expressions of these supreme emperors changed slightly. Hearing about it was one thing, but actually getting it confirmed was another matter. How could they not be moved? However, although their expressions changed, at this moment, none of the supreme emperors said anything. They just stood there quietly and listened to the World King speak. After all, They were all powerful existences at the level of supreme emperors, and not those ordinary people in the secular world. Naturally, they had the ability to control themselves. They wouldn't lose control of their mouths because of the shock in their hearts. The World King wasn't surprised by their reactions. At this moment, he continued, "The arrival of this world's calamity is a great danger to the world, but it is also a great opportunity. It's not just for the heavens and earth, it's the same for us supreme emperors. If we can help the world survive this calamity, the world will undergo a transformation. It is also possible for us to transform during this process and step into a higher realm." Hearing this, some of the supreme emperors looked disapproving, but some of their eyes lit up. Those who didn't take it seriously obviously had a good understanding of the situation of this great calamity. Those whose eyes lit up obviously didn't know enough and had already been incited by the words of the World King. Their expressions, however, it was enough to show the temperament of so many supreme emperors. The Realm Emperor didn't notice their expressions and continued, "Fellow Taoists should know who I am. You all, I'm not the strongest. I'm not the strongest, but I'm confident that I've lived the longest among all of you. 2 emperors is as king. There are 7 true sages. Almost everyone knows this. However, do you know under what circumstances they became true sages?" The World King said faintly. "However, do you know under what circumstances did they become true saints?" The World Emperor said indifferently. Finally, the crowd couldn't control their emotions. Everyone's face was filled with shock. "Do you mean to say that they became true sages during the calamity?" The sovereign frowned and said, "Do you mean that they became true sages during the tribulation of heaven and earth?" The sovereign realm cultivator frowned and asked, "Although I'm not there, I'm not far from it either." The World Emperor smiled faintly. He believed that those words were enough to change everyone's attitude towards the heavenly tribulation. It would greatly increase the chances of the heavenly tribulation surviving this tribulation. Sure enough, his words caused everyone to fall silent. However, at the same time, the eyes of all the supreme emperors were filled with indescribable anticipation and excitement. The true sage was the ultimate goal of all emperors. However, at the same time, all the supreme emperors clearly knew that even if they had reached this step and reached this realm, the true saint stage was still extremely far away from them. Now, they heard that there was a chance to become a true sage during the calamity. Even if the chance was very small, it was enough to make them excited. Their rejection of the calamity had turned into anticipation. Luo Fan looked at this scene and sighed in his heart. To become a true sage, the calamity was not the only thing needed. If one could not build a true sage worldview that belonged to him, no matter how many chances there were, he would not be able to become a true sage. Therefore, at this moment, the excitement of the crowd was extremely unreasonable in his eyes. In fact, he even felt that the World Emperor might not be able to become a true saint during this great calamity and did not have much hope in his heart. Otherwise, he believed that the World King would not have said it, at least, he would not have said it so casually. The primeval Lord of Heaven became a true sage 3 billion years after the first calamity. The Taishang Tao ancestor became a true sage 2 billion years after the second calamity. Sect leader Tong Tian became a true saint 80 million years after the third apocalypse of heaven and earth. The others are similar. The World Emperor added fuel to the fire. As he said this, all the supreme emperors felt like they were about to lose control of their auras. If it was only one person, it could be a coincidence. But if it was the same for almost all of them, wasn't the conclusion obvious? What should we do? A level 3 emperor asked. Hearing this, the World King's eyes revealed a sense of relief. Help the world survive the calamity. As long as we make great contributions, we are more likely to get the chance to become a true sage. The Supreme Emperor continued. Doesn't this mean that if fellow Taoists were to make the arrangements, the greatest amount of merit would definitely go to fellow Taoists? The chance to become a true sage, it will definitely fall on you? When the World King heard this, he laughed and said, "Why do you have to say such funny words? The one who makes the arrangements will definitely get the greatest contribution? How can there be such a good thing in this world? The world is impartial. How can the distribution of the contribution be so easily decided? Hearing this, the Supreme Emperor could not help but look slightly embarrassed. This was the truth. The will of the world was completely different from that of living beings. Of course, it would not be affected by the structure of living beings. The judgment of the contribution would not be the same as the judgment of the will of living beings. That kind of judgment would definitely be more in line with reality. How will the calamity of the world develop this time? I wonder if you have predicted it. Emperor Hua asked. The calamity of the world cannot be predicted. The World Emperor lightly shook his head. I'm not stronger than any of you fellow Taoists. If none of you could divine it, how can I divine it? Although you can't predict it, but with your experience, you should be able to obtain some information, right? Another level 3 emperor said. The World King could not help but bitterly smile when he heard this. Different worlds naturally have different tribulations. Although I've seen quite a few tribulations, this world is completely different from the one I've seen. If I were to use the experience of the world to calculate this world's tribulations, it would be impossible to predict this world's tribulations. Then there will definitely be irreparable consequences. Everyone frowned when they heard this. If you don't know anything, what do you plan to do? The emperor asked. Though I don't know what the calamity will be like, but there is one thing I know. It will definitely be extremely beneficial for this world to survive this calamity. The World King said calmly. What? The other supreme emperors looked at him curiously. Perfect this world. Let this world be free from its current imperfect state. The World King said without hesitation. In an instant, everyone's eyes were filled with sudden realization. Everyone instantly brushed away the fog that had been covering their eyes and hearts, and truly saw the source of the problem. The calamity of the world was aimed at this world. Instead of thinking of all kinds of ways to resist this calamity, it was better to increase the strength of the main body of this calamity. In other words, increase the strength of this world. As long as the strength of this world was increased to a sufficient level, then this calamity, naturally, it would not be a big deal. Tao friend, you must have an idea. At this moment, a level 3 emperor said to the World King. That's my idea. The World King smiled. He did not seem to do anything, but countless rays of light were generated inside the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. They quickly intertwined and changed in front of everyone. Vaguely, they had already formed a mysterious light shadow. This light shadow was so mysterious and so unbelievable. After it was formed, it was impossible to see what it looked like. However, any living being whose eyes came into contact with this light and shadow would instantly receive an endless amount of information. This information was constantly pouring into their minds and merging into their memories. At this moment, all the supreme monarchs felt an endless stream of thoughts flowing into their hearts, along with all kinds of information. They suddenly understood the World King's plan. Perfecting this world was an extremely complicated and mystical process. If it was described in words, it would probably require billions of characters to barely describe the outline of this process. Because of this, the World King did not use words to describe it. Instead, he directly displayed his plan in all kinds of unimaginable ways. He compressed countless information and transformed it into a mysterious state, allowing the supreme emperors to extract it themselves. At this moment, Luo Fan also knew the World King's plan. He couldn't help but praise in his heart. When it came to understanding this world, the World King surpassed all the supreme emperors here. As such, the method that he had come up with to perfect this world was naturally targeted. The feasibility and meticulousness of his plan had reached an unimaginable level. Luo Fan secretly simulated it and found that if he planned it himself, the perfection of the plan would not even be 60% of the World King's. There might even be some mistakes in taking things for granted. What do you think, fellow Taoist? At this moment, the World King turned to Luo Fan and asked. When Luo Fan heard this, he could only smile bitterly. This method is good, but several times better than I thought. Hearing this, the World Emperor's face showed a happy smile. He did not care about the other's praise. However, he had no choice but to pay attention to the praise of Luo Fan, who was a true divine seed in his opinion. This opportunity will be very useful for fellow Taoists. Which aspect are you going to be responsible for? The World King asked with a smile. To the World Emperor, among all the supreme emperors here, the one who had a 1 in 10,000 chance of grasping the opportunity of the great tribulation of heaven and earth and becoming a true sage was Luo Fan. Apart from Luo Fan, no one else, including him, could seize this opportunity more than Luo Fan. I'm not interested in this opportunity. Let me do the rest. Leave the rest to me. Luo Fan just faintly smiled. It was only natural for him to contribute to the great tribulation of heaven and earth. After all, he also lived in this world and received countless blessings from it, allowing his cultivation level to grow from the level of a desperado to the level of a level 3 emperor. Under such circumstances, how could he sit back and watch this world be destroyed in the world's calamity? However, as for how to help this world survive the calamity, he did not have too many requirements. The merit he gained in the process of surviving the calamity was of no use to him. It was of no use to him at all. Naturally, he wouldn't go looking for trouble for himself for this kind of merit. Hearing Luo Fan's words, a strange look flashed across the World King's eyes. Fellow Taoist, did you think I was just joking? That the opportunity doesn't exist? Hearing this, Luo Fan shook his head and said, "Of course not. Why wouldn't I believe you? It's just that I don't want to pin my hopes on this opportunity. I still suggest that you don't underestimate this opportunity to become a true divine. Although this opportunity is extremely small, it is still an opportunity to become a true divine. If you miss this opportunity, you will regret it for billions of years. Furthermore, in my opinion, among everyone here, you're the one with the highest chance of obtaining this opportunity." The Realm King earnestly advised, "Why do you say that? In my opinion, fellow Taoist is most likely to obtain this opportunity, no matter how you look at it." Luo Fan only smiled and said indifferently. This made the World King frown even more. These words made the Realm King frown even more. Then he sighed. "You still don't believe me after all." Luo Fan did not waste any more words. For supreme monarchs, once they were certain, it was almost impossible to change their minds. Under such circumstances, no matter what Luo Fan said, as long as he did not bring out the truth, it would be very difficult to change the World King's mind. In that case, why should he waste time explaining? Seeing this, the World King sighed and finally stopped trying to persuade him. This was the inside of the World King's innate, inextinguishable spirit light. If the World King wanted to talk to anyone without being heard, he could do so with just a thought. Therefore, although he said a lot to Luo Fan, none of the supreme monarchs around him knew what he said to Luo Fan. Just now, they were all discussing what they would choose to be responsible for in the great cause of perfecting the world. After a complicated exchange of interests, at this very moment, the entire process of perfecting the world had been directly divided by them. There was not even a bit left for Luo Fan and the others to choose. Of course, this was not the final division. In fact, at this moment, they were all waiting for Luo Fan and the World King to join in and divide some of the tasks from their hands. However, it was obvious that things would not develop as they had imagined. When Luo Fan saw that the glowing figure had been divided by everyone, he smiled and said, "Since everyone has divided it, then we will be responsible for the remaining underworld soil." Hearing this, everyone was slightly stunned. Fellow Taoist, are you really not going to participate? The transformed emperor frowned and asked, "How can this be considered as not participating? The underworld is also an extremely important part of this world. Perfecting the underworld will also bring countless benefits to this world." Luo Fan only smiled. "I don't believe that you don't know what I'm talking about." The transformed emperor was very dissatisfied. "You don't have to persuade me anymore. I have made up my mind." Luo Fan still smiled and did not continue to say anything. Hearing this, the transformed emperor sighed. Sovereign Hua sighed and glanced at Luo Fan with an extremely regretful look. Then, he no longer looked at him. At this moment, the World King's face was also full of regret, but he did not say much. No matter what choice he made, it was his own choice. As for the final result, it was also his own responsibility. No one else could change it. Immediately, the World King said, "Fellow Taoists, now that all the tasks have been divided, I am excluded. I'm afraid this is not a good idea. We are only dividing it for the first time. Fellow Taoist, you are the one who planned this, so naturally, you should choose first." Another level 3 monarch said. Hearing this, the World King did not hold back. Immediately, he gave a few pointers and directly asked for a large portion of the rather important perfected content. His behavior was normal for the many supreme monarchs. Immediately, there was an argument. After a while, they finally decided on the division of tasks. Since the division of tasks had been decided, the next step was naturally to take action. Immediately, all the supreme monarchs here greeted the World King and turned to leave the connate inextinguishable spiritual light. Luo Fan, however, waited until the end. Only after everyone had left did he bid farewell to the World Emperor. "Fellow Taoist, take care of yourself." The World King looked at Luo Fan. He sighed and said, he looked as if he was looking at a genius who had wasted a great opportunity. That kind of pity, that kind of regret, would make anyone who saw it feel sad. Seeing this, Luo Fan secretly laughed in his heart. If becoming a true sage was so easy, he had personally presided over so many great tribulations of heaven and earth. Wasn't he already a true sage? Immediately, he pretended not to know and left with a smile. After leaving the connate inextinguishable spirit light, he could feel it. Countless inexplicable tremors had already occurred in the Yang realm, and a change that would normally take hundreds of millions of years to occur had occurred in just a few breaths. The entire world of Yang was in a state of prosperity, as if it was transforming in a better direction every moment. This situation was obviously because the supreme monarchs had taken action after leaving the connate inextinguishable spiritual light and had begun to perfect this world. Regarding this process of perfection, Luo Fan did not feel much. He just smiled faintly and had already led Gue Shou and the others into the underworld. Gue Shou and the others were now supreme monarchs, and Gue Shou himself was even a second-grade monarch. However, in front of Luo Fan, they were still the same as before. At this moment, the three of them were full of doubts about Luo Fan's decision. They were full of confusion, but none of them dared to voice it out. They could only keep guessing in their hearts. If you have something to say, say it. Is it fun to hold it in? Luo Fan looked at them and could not help but frown. Gue Shou and the others were a little embarrassed when they heard Luo Fan's words. In the end, it was Gue Shou who said, "Why doesn't Master participate in the process of transforming the world of Yang? I heard from the Realm Lord that if you do well, you might be able to obtain the opportunity to become a true sage. Even if the opportunity is small, it will still be beneficial. Why does Master want to give it up?" After saying this, Gue Shou let out a sigh of relief. This doubt had been suppressed in his heart for a long time. Now that he finally let it out, it was as if he had finally removed a stone from his heart. "Do the two of you think so too?" Luo Fan turned to ask Qing, Yi, and Yuji. The two of them naturally nodded continuously. Green Wing said, "Although Gue Shou has always been unreliable, his words have touched the bottom of our hearts. We are indeed doubtful about Master's choice." After hearing this, Luo Fan said lightly, "Since you have doubts about this, I will explain it to you. Well, you won't understand much, but you have to remember one thing. A true sage is a living being who surpasses heaven and earth." After hearing Luo Fan's words, whether it was Gue Shou, Qing Yi, or Yuji, they all looked puzzled. If they had all kinds of speculations before, they became even more doubtful and confused after hearing Luo Fan's explanation. Seeing their reaction, Luo Fan smiled faintly and said, "When you understand this, perhaps you will be able to see the path to becoming a true sage." Chapter 1725. After Luo Fan said this, Gue Shou and the other two fell into an inexplicable contemplation. They still couldn't understand what Luo Fan was talking about, and they didn't understand that Luo Fan had already included the true path to becoming a true sage in this sentence. However, they knew that this sentence might be the most beneficial sentence that Luo Fan had ever said to them since he enlightened them. This kind of fundamental understanding made them suddenly feel an inexplicable joy. In this joy, they engraved Luo Fan's sentence in the depths of their life source. They thought in their hearts, "Even if I forget myself, I will never forget this sentence." Luo Fan didn't give them too much time to feel emotional. He said lightly, "I originally planned to let you adjust the underworld yourself and make it perfect, but now it's too late." Hearing this, Gue Shou said solemnly, "Everything is at Master's command." Luo Fan's heart moved. He raised his hand and gently waved. The Book of Life and Death and the judge's brush in Gue Shou's hand had already floated out of Gue Shou's body and directly fell into Luo Fan's hands. This was the first time that Luo Fan held the Book of Life and Death and the judge's brush in his hands after they were formed. The touch of these two magic treasures was extremely mysterious. Touching these two magical treasures felt like touching everything in the world, whether it was soft or hard, whether it was illusory or real, whether it was cold or hot. Any feeling could be felt from this touch. It seemed that the Book of Life and Death and the judge's brush were everything in the universe. With a slight thought, Luo Fan's will had already been poured into the Book of Life and Death and the judge's brush. These two magic treasures were primordial spiritual treasures. Moreover, they were incomparably powerful. In this underworld, there were even primordial spiritual treasures like primordial spiritual treasures. It was self-evident how powerful it was. Even with Luo Fan's ability, it was impossible to refine these two magic treasures when they already had owners. At this moment, he poured his will into it. Of course, he wasn't going to refine these two magic treasures. What he needed to do was to sense the roots of these two Dharma treasures. He needed to find the fundamental imprint that belonged to this part of the world. There were countless ways to transform the underworld. There were countless methods to perfect the netherworld earth. But no matter what method it was impossible to compare to the requirements of nature, and it was impossible to compare to what was derived from the circulation of the great Tao of the world. The difference between the two was as obvious as the difference between a natural and man-made one. That was why Luo Fan had never placed his hopes on it. He did not allow the underworld earth to evolve naturally because it would take far too long if he allowed it to evolve naturally. According to the current situation, the underworld would not be able to truly evolve to a perfect state even after the great calamity of heaven and earth had passed. In comparison, Gue Shou's own modification of the underworld earth might not be able to compare to the natural evolution of the underworld earth. But after all, it was faster and more flexible. It had a stronger ability to adjust. In a short period of time, it was much better than the natural evolution of the underworld earth. This was actually the fundamental reason why the authority of the underworld earth was given to Gue Shou and the others. The world was impartial, but it was also the most realistic. If it was useless to the world, if it was not beneficial to the evolution of the world would not give any benefits to anyone. Even an existence like Gue Shou was the same. The internal structure of the Book of Life and Death and the judge's brush was extremely complicated and abstruse. It felt like two connate, inextinguishable spirit lights. Luo Fan's will shuttled back and forth between them. It was as if he was shuttling back and forth between the two connate, inextinguishable spirit lights. At every moment, there was an endless flow of information. At every moment, there were all kinds of incredible structures passing through his will and his senses. It was obviously not an easy task to find the fundamental imprint of this world. Fortunately, Luo Fan had already comprehended more than a dozen connate, inextinguishable spirit lights. Under such circumstances, he had a lot of experience in searching for what he wanted from the connate, inextinguishable spirit treasures that were similar to the connate, inextinguishable spirit lights. This experience made his search process extremely smooth. After passing through countless structures and scanning through countless information, Luo Fan spent a long time and finally found what he was looking for in the depths of the two magic treasures. It was the fundamental imprint of this world. This kind of fundamental imprint was a mysterious existence that couldn't even be described with words. It existed in the depths of the two magic treasures. It was like a nebula that constantly rotated and changed. Faintly, there seemed to be a lot of information leaking out. However, this information was beyond the understanding of ordinary creatures. Even though Luo Fan had already sensed the existence of this imprint and received this information, he still couldn't understand what it was saying. This was extremely normal. This kind of fundamental imprint existed to guide the two magic treasures and then guide the changes of the underworld. The information that flowed out naturally flowed towards the magic treasures and the underworld. In other words, only the magic treasures and the underworld could understand it. In other words, this kind of information could only be understood by the will of the world. Although Luo Fan was already a level 3 emperor, and he wasn't an ordinary level 3 emperor, he wasn't a true divine existence either. How could he understand this kind of information that targeted the will of the world? However, Luo Fan didn't need to know what this information was. What he wanted wasn't to know how to modify the underworld Earth. Instead, he wanted the underworld Earth to change and become perfect. Therefore, what he needed to do was to guide this information out and pour it into the underworld. He didn't need to understand what this information was. Luo Fan was very clear about his mission. At this moment, with a thought, his will directly constructed a mysterious array outside the two marks. These two arrays were so mysterious that they were like two different worlds. They directly appeared around the two fundamental imprints and continuously intercepted and absorbed all the information that flowed out of the imprints. At this moment, a faint smile appeared on the face of Luo Fan's clone. He raised his hand and pointed at the void. In an instant, an inexplicable wave of information surged out of his finger, penetrated the space-time layer, penetrated the nomological laws layer, rushed into the unseen world, and brazenly integrated with the Great Path. At this moment, the Great Path trembled slightly. The information was like an invisible hand that brazenly inserted itself into the Great Path and began to constantly stir it, causing the Great Path to start surging violently in the process. This caused bubbles to appear on the Great Path one after another, resulting in one explosion after another. These bubbles and explosions affected a very wide range. They directly penetrated the unseen world and poured into the nomological laws layer, causing the underworld's nomological laws layer to undergo all sorts of incredible changes. All the rules and laws within seemed to have received a new mission. They began to form a new combination. As a result of this change, the entire underworld experienced all sorts of incredible changes. Space-time after space-time, they began to be divided. These space-time were divided according to the various structures of the Yang realm. Each space-time had its own unique characteristics, and each space-time had a completely different law from the other space-time. Due to the division of space-time, within the pitch-black sun, the buildings that had originally turned into boundless stars seemed to be attracted by some indescribable attractive force. They began to break away from the pitch-black sun and sink into the space-time, turning into suns within those space-time. The civilized world that had originally formed on the surface of the star turned into another space-time. It merged into the depths of the sun and formed another space and time. It was just like the scene when the netherworld Earth was completely transformed by the turtle. This change was so natural and fast that it made the eyes of Guei Shou, Qingyi, and Yuji shine brightly. Qingyi and Yuji were fine. They were simply shocked by Luo Fan's methods. However, Guei Shou instantly sensed the great difference between his own transformation method and Luo Fan's. He also clearly understood how great the gap between him and Luo Fan was, as well as how comprehensive it was. With this understanding, more and more ideas began to emerge in his mind. All sorts of inexplicable insights made him vaguely understand a lot of things that he couldn't figure out in the past, no matter how hard he thought about it. His cultivation realm began to inexplicably loosen. Luo Fan naturally didn't care about what the three of them had comprehended. Although he seemed relaxed, he was actually giving it his all. It had to be known that this was the fundamental mark of this world. It was a message that was transmitted to the primordial origin, spiritual treasure, and the entire underworld. He wanted to directly transfer it out of the primordial origin, spiritual treasure, and send it into the great Tao of the underworld. It was equivalent to directly moving a mountain that was 100 times larger than him. It was needless to say how difficult it was. At this moment, he had already poured all of his mental energy into it. His entire mind was suppressed within it. This kind of difficulty was self-evident. Apart from the changes in the underworld, due to the division and fusion of time and space, there were countless more subtle and mysterious changes. These changes were subtle and profound, and involved countless profound and mysterious changes. Even though Luo Fan saw the countless changes clearly, he couldn't completely understand the root cause of these changes. He couldn't understand how these changes were produced and what effect they had. However, the results of these changes were very obvious. As these changes occurred, waves of inexplicable vibrations spread out from the underworld and directly surged into the entire Yang world. It seemed to make the changes in the Yang world even faster. At this moment, none of the supreme monarchs in the Yang world were able to notice such a subtle and natural change. None of them knew the root cause of this change. At this moment, they were mostly carrying out their own tasks, which were to perfect the entire Yang realm. They occasionally noticed these inexplicable natural changes, but they only thought that it was the result of the World Emperor's plan. It was just the overall change that was caused by everyone's modification of the Yang world. Time passed by slowly. In the blink of an eye, 10,000 years had passed. During these 10,000 years, all the supreme emperors, including Luo Fan, were taking action. Through their efforts, the entire world of Yang was now a world of difference compared to before. Not to mention anything else in the Yang world. The great Tao fragment, which had filled every corner of the world and caused the entire world to become extremely chaotic, and the mysteries of the true saint, had vaguely formed a long river in the void at this moment. A long river that was like the embryonic form of the great Tao. The long river stretched across the sky, faintly communicating with the indescribable place in the depths of time and space, the depths of the world, and resonating with each other. Compared to before, that inexplicable place had also undergone all sorts of indescribable changes. Vaguely, it seemed to be closer to this world. This caused the number of life forms that could sense that inexplicable place to increase by more than 10,000 times. These living beings that had sensed the inexplicable presence had unknowingly been separated from the beasts that were originally in a blur. As a result, the beasts that originally existed in this world with the strength of a false saint unknowingly gained intelligence and began to gradually transform into a true false saint. Under these changes, the absolute protagonists of this world before Luo Fan's arrival, the kind that possessed the strength of a false saint. However, the life forms that didn't have complete intelligence began to gradually disappear. This was also the case for the Yang world. The changes in the underworld were even more obvious than the Yang world. After 10,000 years of improvement, the entire underworld had completely changed. The underworld had changed from a complete space-time to billions of densely packed space-time. These billions of space-time floated in the void, like the starry sky of the universe. It looked so majestic and mysterious. And these billions of space-time weren't randomly distributed. They formed an extremely profound formation according to some sort of extremely profound pattern, and they enveloped the Yang world at the center. In the center of these countless space-time, Luo Fan, Guei Shou, Qing Yi, and Yu Ji quietly floated. The Book of Life and Death and the Judge's brush in Luo Fan's hands constantly shone with an inexplicable light. Although it had been scattered into countless space-time, the underworld's great Tao was still as complete as before. It was as vast as before. However, compared to before, this great Tao was quite different. There seemed to be a few more stars on it, and as they flickered, it made the great Tao appear even more beautiful. I've reached the limit. Next, I have to wait for the Yang world to completely change before it can change further. On this day, such a thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. He stopped the process of constantly transferring the information from the heaven and earth fundamental imprint to the underworld great way that had lasted for 10,000 years and retracted his finger. As he withdrew his finger, the Book of Life and Death and the Judge's brush in his hand began to tremble violently. Suddenly, the two pseudo-primordial origin spiritual treasures broke away from his grasp, rushed into the countless space-time, and began to flash. This kind of light penetrated the void, brazenly wrapping around the endless space-time of the underworld. Subsequently, the two magic treasures collapsed with a bang, and they transformed into countless fragments from their original state. They were like exploding fireworks, and they completely enveloped the boundless space and time. Every tiny fragment rushed into a space-time, causing the space-time to tremble inexplicably. Not good. Guizhou was shocked at this time and directly exclaimed, "Don't worry, this is a necessary process." Luo Fan listened, but just faintly said. Hearing this, Guizhou's heart trembled, and he stopped the power he was about to use. He had great faith in Luo Fan. Even if the situation at this moment was quite bad, as if the Book of Life and Death and the Judge's brush had completely collapsed and merged into the countless space-time, he was still willing to believe in Luo Fan. He believed that this was just a process and not the final result. Of course, although he believed in it, he was still a little worried. At this moment, there was still an inexplicable worry in the depths of his eyes. Regarding this, Luo Fan didn't say anything more. No matter what, the result would soon come out. No matter how much he explained, it would just be nonsense at this moment. The Book of Life and Death and the Judge's brush had completely collapsed and disappeared. The number of fragments that exploded, it happened to be the number of the countless space-time. Moreover, every fragment just happened to target one of the space-time and directly rushed into a specific space-time. At this moment, the vibration of the space-time had already reached its peak. In a trance, the space-time began to emit inexplicable light. This kind of light was so mysterious and profound that words couldn't even describe its color. Everyone who saw this light would only have an inexplicable feeling in their hearts. This was the light that truly stabilized the space-time. With the appearance of this light, the underworld, which was originally like the void of the universe, seemed to have turned into a huge sun. It was completely filled with this light, and all that could be seen was an indescribable light. The main body of the light could no longer be seen, and the mysterious space-time could no longer be seen. With such a change, the rules and laws in the space-time were more than 100 times stronger. Originally, they could just barely escape the rules and laws of the space-time. All the defenses of the spirits and souls that resisted the disappearance of the space-time were instantly broken, and they were directly absorbed into the flowing rules of the space-time. They began to carry on the reincarnation cycle that had been broken before. At this moment, Guizhou suddenly felt a powerful force surging in from the depths of his body. In a trance, he found that he was many times stronger than before. Just a moment ago, he had already turned into an ant-like existence in his eyes at this very moment. What is this? Could it be that I have already become a level 3 emperor? Such a thought flashed through Guizhou's mind. An extremely shocked expression suddenly appeared on his face. This is impossible. A level 3 emperor can only become a level 3 emperor by mastering a congenital, inextinguishable divine light. How can I have any congenital, inextinguishable divine light now? Rational judgment made Guizhou dispel his previous thoughts. However, power was power. Even if he had dispelled that thought, he still had an inexplicable feeling that his strength was probably already comparable to an ordinary level 3 emperor. With a slight jolt in his heart, he suddenly turned his eyes to Luo Fan. With this glance, he couldn't help but smile bitterly. That was really just an illusion. I really am not a level 3 emperor. The moment he saw Luo Fan, he found that his strength was still many times weaker than Luo Fan's. At this time, even though he had improved so much, when he looked at Luo Fan, who was a level 3 emperor, he still couldn't see through Luo Fan's strength at all. He still didn't understand what level Luo Fan had reached. If he was really a level 3 emperor, then he would be at the same level as Luo Fan. How could this be? The change in Gui Shou's body naturally couldn't escape Luo Fan's perception. At this time, he had an idea and turned his eyes to Gui Shou. After a slight sensing, he couldn't help but sigh inwardly. He has actually formed a deep integration with the underworld and the two pseudo-primordial origin spiritual treasures and turned into a different kind of level 3 emperor. I don't know whether this is good or bad for him. At this moment, the reason why the turtle's lifespan had undergone such a change and suddenly increased so much was none other than the change that had occurred in the underworld, causing it to resonate with the underworld, the Book of Life and Death, and the underworld Judge Brush. This kind of resonance allowed him to borrow the essence of these three, just like a level 3 emperor could borrow the essence of the congenital, inextinguishable divine light. That was why he had suddenly become so much stronger. In other words, at this moment, the underworld, the Book of Life and Death, and the Judge's Brush had formed a certain degree of integration, which replaced the effect of the congenital, inextinguishable divine light. Gui Shou, who had already resonated with these three, was like a supreme emperor who had refined the congenital, inextinguishable divine light. That was why the current situation appeared. As for why Luo Fan didn't know whether this was a good or bad thing for Gui Shou, the reason was even simpler. Because the great tribulation of heaven and earth was coming. Gui Shou, who had formed a resonance with these three, would bear the strongest attack of the great tribulation of heaven and earth when the great tribulation of heaven and earth came. If he couldn't resist it, then what awaited him was clearly death. Chapter 17:26. At that instant, the World Emperor in the Yang world seemed to have sensed something. He raised his brows as if he had sensed something. However, he was currently extremely busy. Although he had sensed something, he did not have the time to look into it. With a thought, he had already put this matter aside. There's still 10 million years left. He murmured. There was an indescribable anticipation and worry in his eyes. 10 million years was the time when the great tribulation of heaven and earth was about to descend. That's right. After all these years of perfecting the world, the tribulation of the world had been brought forward once again. Now, there were only 10 million years left before the great tribulation of heaven and earth would descend. Furthermore, as the heaven-span passageway was completed, it was getting closer and closer. The many supreme martial emperors who were changing the world and perfecting it all sensed that the great tribulation of heaven and earth had arrived early. After all, knowing that a great calamity was about to descend, these supreme emperors naturally pushed their senses to the limit and tried their best to sense the situation of the calamity. The arrival of the great trial of heaven and earth was naturally the most important thing to them. How could they not care about such a huge advance? However, even though they knew that the calamity of the world had arrived ahead of time, they did not feel any regret. Although it wasn't a good thing that the great tribulation of the world had been brought forward, it meant that the world's perfection had already caused changes to the great tribulation of the world. In other words, the world's ability to endure the great tribulation of the world was much greater than before. This clearly meant that their hard work over the years had paid off. At this moment, there were new changes in the underworld. In the blink of an eye, a figure appeared. The space-time hovering in the void began to tremble slightly. All sorts of new and inexplicable brilliance began to emerge from the depths of the space-time. It penetrated the void, the space-time, and pierced through the inexplicable light that filled the entire underworld. Under this brilliance, the bright scene in the underworld gradually faded. It was replaced by... It began to reappear like the original cosmic starry sky. Of course, this was only the general appearance. It was different from the starry sky of the universe, where all the stars emitted the same or similar light. In the starry sky of this universe, the light emitted by all the stars was different. Every single one of them was very eye-catching and mysterious. As these lights interweaved, one could faintly sense an indescribable vitality brewing. At this moment, Guizhou felt as if he had been split into countless parts. Each and every space-time, it was as if it had become part of his body. An indescribable, mysterious power continuously poured into his body through all kinds of incredible connections. It integrated into his soul, making him feel as if he had once again made a huge improvement in the third Great Emperor realm. After the illusion that he had transformed into a level 3 Emperor, Guizhou no longer accepted this feeling directly like before. Instead, he began to distinguish it with his own thoughts and intuition. In an instant, he had already sensed it. This feeling did not truly belong to him. This was clearly the feeling of something brewing in his body. In other words, these powers. It was not because of him, but because of the thing that was brewing. After understanding this, the words that Luo Fan had said before instantly emerged in his mind. This is the book of life and death, and the judge's brush. A kind of understanding was born in his heart. With this understanding, he could not help but show a faint smile on his face. Then, the phantom of a book and a brush gradually emerged behind his head. This book, obviously, it was the appearance of the book of life and death. The brush, of course, also looked like the judge's brush. However, whether it was the book of life and death or the judge's brush, they were much different from before. The book of life and death seemed to have become a lot lighter, and the judge's brush had become a lot more exquisite. It was as if both of them were evolving. This is turning the fake into the real. At this time, Luo Fan had an inexplicable feeling in his heart. The changes of the book of life and death and the judge's brush were beyond his imagination. He originally thought that the book of life and death and the judge's brush would at most become a lot stronger. No matter what, it would be impossible for them to turn the fake into the real and become real primordial origin spiritual treasures. But he did not expect that the book of life and death and the judge's brush would actually break through their limits and really start the process of turning the fake into the real. They were really going to break away from the limit of the pseudo primordial origin spiritual treasures and turn into real primordial origin spiritual treasures. Thinking of this, he could not help but smile bitterly in his heart. Of course, his bitter smile was not because he had missed the opportunity to control the two pseudo-primordial origin spiritual treasures and turn them into the real in Guizhou's body. In this way, when the two pseudo-primordial origin spiritual treasures became real primordial origin spiritual treasures, they would naturally fuse with Guizhou. At that time, Guizhou would naturally become the master of the two primordial origin spiritual treasures and become an existence of the true saint level from another path. His bitter smile was because although the process of turning the fake into the real had begun, it was still almost impossible. The difficulty of turning the fake into the real was almost like that of a supreme emperor becoming a true saint. And it could be imagined how difficult it was for a supreme emperor to become a true saint. Therefore, it was natural to know how many tests, how much time, and how much metamorphosis a pseudo-primordial origin spiritual treasure had to go through to become a real primordial origin spiritual treasure. Even if the pseudo-primordial origin spiritual treasures in front of him were naturally born in the underworld, they would not be an exception. According to Luo Fan's calculation, although the book of life and death and the judge's brush had already started the process of metamorphosis, the whole process needed to be tempered by the great tribulation of heaven and earth again and again, and could only be completed with the help of the benefits obtained after the great tribulation of heaven and earth. Without going through the great tribulation of heaven and earth, Even after countless billions of years, these two pseudo-primordial origin spiritual treasures were still pseudo-primordial origin spiritual treasures, and they would never become real primordial origin spiritual treasures. And this was by no means good news for Gue Shou. Because of the nature of this world, even the first great tribulation of heaven and earth would be equivalent to the strength of other perfect worlds. It was equivalent to the strength of 4 or 5 great tribulations of heaven and earth in other perfect worlds. In this case, the second great tribulation of heaven and earth might be at the level of the 5th or 6th great tribulation of heaven and earth. In this way, the 4th or 5th great tribulation of heaven and earth might be comparable to the 9th great tribulation of heaven and earth in other worlds. In this way, the possibility that this world could survive the 9th great tribulation of heaven and earth and transform into a perfect world was obviously very small. In this way, it could be known that the Book of Life and Death and the Judge's Brush wanted to become real, primordial origin spiritual treasures. The possibility of that happening was also minuscule. And at this time, these two pseudo-primordial origin spiritual treasures were turning real in Gue Shou's body. The failure of their transformation was almost fatal for Gue Shou. Knowing this, how could Luo Fan not sigh? At this time, Gue Shou did not think too much. At this moment, he felt the Book of Life and Death and the Judge's Brush brewing in his body again. But his heart was only filled with endless joy and hope. For a long time, he just remembered that all these things were possible because of Luo Fan. So he hurriedly bowed to Luo Fan and kept thanking him. Hearing this, Luo Fan just sighed and said, "For you, I don't know whether this is a good thing or a bad thing. What Master said, I don't understand. I don't understand." Gue Shou furrowed his brows in confusion. At this time, Qing Yi and Yu Ji on the side also looked curious. Obviously, they did not know what danger Gue Shou had in the process that made them so envious. How could he let his master say such a thing? At this time, Luo Fan did not hide what he had guessed, and calmly told what he had thought before to Gue Shou. When he was speaking, whether it was Gue Shou, Qing Yi, or Yu Ji, their faces all turned green and white. By the time Luo Fan finished speaking, Gue Shou was already dumbfounded. So, no matter how I cultivate, it is impossible for me to get rid of it and become a true sage. He murmured, "It's not impossible, but the chance is very small." Luo Fan sighed and said. Gue Shou suddenly smiled bitterly. "I didn't expect it to be like this. Although I have always thought that I can't become a true sage, I still have some hope in my heart. After all, I still hope that there will be a miracle and become a true sage. I didn't expect that the hope of this miracle has been cut off." But Luo Fan could only sigh inwardly. This kind of thing had to be adjusted by Gue Shou himself. No matter what other people said, it would just be scratching an itch without much effect. Gue Shou's expression changed for a long time. He took a deep breath and bowed to Luo Fan, saying, "Thank you, Master, for telling me this. If it wasn't for Master, I might have been kept in the dark for hundreds of millions of years. This is my mistake. If it wasn't for me, you wouldn't be in this situation now." Luo Fan sighed and said. Hearing this, Gue Shou shook his head repeatedly and said, "Master, why do you say this? From the beginning, all of this is my own choice. All the time, Master has only given us help. Now that I have fallen into this situation, it is only the result of my own choice. How can I blame Master?" Luo Fan sighed. He didn't try to explain that it was all his own fault. This kind of argument not only couldn't make anyone feel better, but also couldn't bring any benefits to the matter. In this case, what was the use? The most important thing now was obviously to find a way to solve this matter. He furrowed his brows and thought carefully. Now, the two pseudo-primordial origin spiritual treasures began to brew in Gue Shou's body, ready to turn the fake into the real. The connection between the two and Gue Shou had been really established. Even if Luo Fan wanted to cut it off, he must erase Gue Shou first. But obviously, Luo Fan couldn't do this. Letting the two ferment in Gue Shou's body and turn the fake into the real, Guesho's connection with the two would become closer and closer. Restricted by these two, it would become stronger and stronger. In the end, they would become inseparable. They would live and die together. Once the great tribulation of heaven and earth surpassed a certain limit, the destruction of the two pseudo-primordial origin spiritual treasures would naturally destroy Guesho directly. Obviously, these two situations were not what Luo Fan wanted to see. Countless thoughts and methods emerged in his mind, but they were quickly eliminated. Several days passed like this. Luo Fan let out a long sigh and said, "Now, there's only one way to solve your current situation." "What is it?" Guesho was also constantly thinking during this process. But obviously, he couldn't think of any results. Now, suddenly hearing Luo Fan said there was a way, his surprise was self-evident. Luo Fan said faintly, "Abandon everything in this body." These words instantly struck Guesho like thunder and lightning, leaving him dumbfounded. "Abandon everything in this body," he murmured with panic in his eyes. He was at a loss, and there was even an inexplicable rejection. Everything he had in this body, whether it was his strength, divine soul, or his realm, they were all accumulated through countless years of hard work. They were the achievements of his countless efforts. How could he be willing to abandon them like this? After saying this, Luo Fan didn't speak anymore, quietly waiting for Guesho to make a choice. "In the end, I'm abandoning everything for that tiny bit of hope for a miracle that is already insignificant. Or should I give up the insignificant hope of a miracle and hold on to my current strength?" He thought like this in his heart, with an inexplicable look of inquiry in his eyes. Abandoning everything in this body didn't mean losing his life. Instead, he directly threw his most fundamental life essence into samsara, reincarnated, and started to cultivate again from zero. This was not a simple thing. It was not a simple thing, and it might even be extremely dangerous. If he was not careful, the current him would completely disappear and be replaced by a brand new, completely different version of him. If he gave up that hope and kept everything he had now, not only would he not have to take that kind of risk, but he could also continue to gain more and more benefits from the brewing of these two pseudo-primordial origin spiritual treasures, so that his power in the underworld would become stronger and more amazing. In the end, he might even be on the same level as a true sage, and he could easily crush any level 3 emperor. It was not a simple matter for anyone to choose between these two. That was to say, no matter which one Guesho chose, Luo Fan would not look down on Guesho. However, such a thought flashed in his heart. If he chooses to abandon everything, maybe I can really accept him as a disciple. At this moment, Guesho could be said to be on the peak of becoming a true sage. If he was willing to give up this path for the hope of escaping, it was enough to show how strong his determination to escape was. This was enough to shake Luo Fan's mind, enough to make Luo Fan willing to take the risk to give him a chance to escape. Guesho thought for a long time, and his eyes relaxed. He said with great shame, "Thank you for your plan, Master, but I still can't make up my mind to give up everything." Hearing this, Luo Fan couldn't help but feel a trace of disappointment in his heart. He sighed and said, "This is your own choice, but you don't need to be ashamed." At this time, Guesho was already relaxed, and his aura was much stronger than before. The phantoms of the Book of Life and Death and the judge's brush that appeared behind his head seemed to have become a little more solid at this time. Qing Yi and Yu Ji both frowned at this time, and Qing Yi said, "Why are you not willing to abandon everything to fight for that opportunity? Isn't it a kind of torture for you in this state where there is no hope of escaping?" Guesho said, "It's not that I don't want to give up everything that I have now, but I have self-awareness. With my aptitude, even if I abandon everything and reincarnate, I'm afraid that I can only return to my current level. The possibility of escaping is not much better than now." As he spoke, his eyes revealed an even more obvious look of open-mindedness. Hearing this, Qing Yi snorted, "If you don't have courage, then you don't have courage. What's self-awareness? If it's me, I will definitely abandon everything. If it's you, will you really abandon everything? Guizhou sighed and asked. Qing Yi opened his mouth to reply, but when the words reached his mouth, he could not spit them out. It was as if something was blocking his throat. After all, she was not really unreasonable. She was an unreasonable person. Thinking about it, if she was really in the same state as Guizhou, could she really abandon everything and risk becoming another person to be reincarnated for that insignificant miracle? Humph. In the end, Qing Yi just snorted and said nothing. Looking at Guizhou's decision, Luo Fan was a little disappointed. But it was not that he couldn't understand. At this moment, Guizhou became more powerful because of that determination, and he had no doubt about it. For cultivators, knowing themselves was a form of cultivation in itself. Guizhou's current decision, although it was not a really wise decision in his opinion, was to give up the last hope of escaping, but it also recognized himself. It also carried out his own way of cultivation and could have some understanding. It was not surprising that he had gained something. Although you have made up your mind, you can't completely give up hope. Next, the best thing for you is to work hard to help this world survive the tribulation of heaven and earth. As long as you survive enough tribulation of heaven and earth, you may be able to surpass your limit and really escape. Luo Fan smiled slightly. Hearing what Luo Fan said, Guizhou nodded. Yes, Guizhou answered. For him, this was a matter of course. This side of the world will experience the first tribulation of heaven and earth in 10 million years. Now you have to wholeheartedly help this world survive the tribulation of heaven and earth, so you can't be as muddle-headed as before. Luo Fan said faintly. Master, please guide me. Guizhou hurriedly said. Hearing this, Luo Fan raised his hand and pointed in the direction of the Yang world. You can now contact the Realm King. The Realm King must have left many tasks that require the cooperation of the underworld. You are now an alternative level 3 Emperor, and you have integrated with the underworld. For him, there are countless benefits, and he will certainly not let it go. Hearing this, Guizhou's eyes lit up. At this moment, the Realm King in the Yang world seemed to feel something, and his mood suddenly relaxed a lot. It seems that something good for me is about to happen. Secretly feeling the changes in his mood, the Realm King couldn't help but show a faint smile. At this moment, a figure slowly appeared in front of his cave residence. As soon as this figure appeared, the Realm King's eyes lit up, and he said loudly, It turns out that the person who became a level 3 Emperor was fellow Taoist. I didn't sense it before, so I didn't congratulate fellow Taoist. I'm really sorry. The person who appeared in front of his cave residence was none other than Guizhou's clone. At this moment, Guizhou's body had completely integrated with the underworld. He was completely restrained in the underworld by the Book of Life and Death and the Judge's Brush, and could not leave the underworld at all. Therefore, the only way for him to walk in the Yang world now was obviously to use a clone. As the Realm King spoke, his clone had already naturally condensed in front of Guizhou. His cheerful appearance showed how much he welcomed Guizhou's arrival. As the oldest third-grade martial emperor, it was self-evident that a world emperor's perception was strong. Before Guizhou appeared, he had a vague premonition. At this moment, Guizhou appeared here. Even if it was just a clone, how could he not know what had happened to Guizhou? How could he not understand that the underworld was completely different from when he first sensed it? At this moment, he had a vague guess about Guizhou's purpose for coming. This time, I came to fellow Taoist place to see if there's anything I can help fellow Taoist. Guizhou said with a smile. After recognizing himself, Guizhou no longer felt inferior to a level 3 emperor like the Realm King. There was only a kind of confidence that he was not inferior to the Realm King, and that his essence would not be inferior to the Realm King. It was precisely because of this confidence that he could be so at ease in front of the Realm King, and there was no longer any uneasiness like before. This was also the reason why Luo Fan asked him to negotiate with the Realm King himself. If it wasn't for his current mentality, if he had maintained the previous inferiority complex, Luo Fan would have definitely come directly to negotiate with the Realm King like before, to decide what Gui Sho should do and how he should do it. To be continued.